Okay. So, how black people outside Africa found themselves where they are currently? So, actually a few of the main scholars who deal with that, you have Ivan van Sertima, Renoko Rashidi. There are others, but those are two of the most well known. And Renoko Rashidi is still alive. Ivan van Sertima has passed away, but he deals with the global African presence, and you can actually find some of his lectures online by the same title, where you have different stages of migrations. The first migration out of the continent was some estimate around 80,000 years ago, 80 to 90,000 years ago, and some of those, ended up going into. And when we're talking about first migration, we're talking about modern human beings going out, Homo sapiens sapiens. So you have those who went into Europe, who went into Asia, and so forth. Those who went into those places, they ended up going into places where there wasn't much sun because of a glaciation period. It's called the WURM, W-U-R-M, glaciation period. And as they were there, it's like if you go to the Arctic poles, you go to any of these places, you'll see Arctic owls, Arctic hares, Arctic foxes, and all of them are very white in color, and part of it has to do with, the nature of the snow natural selection, that animals that are very dark, they would show up against the snow, that's one. But when it comes to what we now know as Eurasians and things of that nature, even a black person, if they go to a place where it's not sunny, they will start to become less dark, whereas if they stay in the sun, they'll get darker. So that's even a black person, even over the course of like a month. You go to Chicago and you're indoors, you'll say, oh, you're looking at, that's just one person over a few months. So now picture this over generations and generations. There are places now when you go to them like northern Norway, Sweden, some of these Scandinavian countries, that you have months and months where the sun doesn't even rise, you understand? Because of the axis tilt of the earth and things of this nature. So if you are in that environment over, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, it ends up being a combination of things. One, lack of sun. The other thing is, you have something of a natural advantage, those who are lighter in terms of if they are up against snow, if they are up against ice, and say they're trying to hunt game. So someone who is jet black, first it would be very difficult for you to be in that type of environment and stay jet black, because what's going to make you that way? The sun isn't there and other things. But then those who are lighter have a selective advantage over those that are darker because they're able to blend in with snow, things like that. So, then you just have processes of natural selection going on, which is why all the animals that you find up there and also in Antarctica, the other side, you find polar bears, you find all of these, especially predatory animals, who Arctic hawks and things like that, all of them are very white in color. Arctic owls, so you can see all of this. You can see that Eurasians are parallel to that. Like if you put a human being who's black in that type of environment, what would happen to them as well? Same thing that would happen to the bear if you take it there, the hare if you take it there, the hawk if you take it there, the owl if you take it there. So you have those two factors. Now you have other migrations out after that time, so that's one of the first migrations going out. But then you have other migrations, and this is where we're talking about. And all of this you can put under the rubric of voluntary migrations. So the very first people to go out and populate the earth. You can still find some of these people in places as far-flung as India, as the Pacific Islands, as Australia, as Hawaii, as Tasmania, all of these different places, even to this day, except for Tasmania because the Europeans went there and exterminated them off of the face of the earth. That you can still find in some of these other places people who look more African than you do, who are blacker than both you and I. And that's from that first voluntary migration. So that's one, people found themselves, where they are currently in the world because they migrated, they sailed there. The only way to get to Hawaii is to take a ship and sail there. You're crossing almost half of the entire Pacific Ocean to get to Hawaii, so how do you get there? Now, what Europeans like to do, because they want to lie and say that they were the first ones who discovered shipbuilding, that they say, oh, well, at the time that they populated some of these Pacific islands, the water level was lower, so they just used land bridges. But you can't explain this with Hawaii. Where's the land bridge that leads from Asia all the way across the entire ocean to Hawaii? When you look at images of them, they are very black. They look just like anyone you would see in Ghana to this day. So that's that. So that's the ancient voluntary migration. Then you come to the forced migration, which is the one that we're told about, because that's where Eurasians enter history. So you have trans-Saharan, transatlantic, what some call the Ma'afa, which is a great catastrophe, or Mangamizi, which has the idea of a great catastrophe that someone has intentionally perpetrated on you. So that's another one, and that's much later. So from 80,000 years ago, you're coming all the way up to here. And there are studies that were done on Africans in what are called the Andaman Islands. This is also in the Pacific Islands, where they are said to be one of the first groups that left Africa. And if you see them, they look just like any Ghanaian, any African. If you just say, oh, where are they coming from? You would say, oh, they come from Senegal or something like this. But yes, so they did a study and found out that their genetics are consistent with the very first people who came out. So you can get an idea of what those people look like and what Europeans would have looked like if they would have stayed in this equator type of region, but they didn't. They went out to a place where there's no sun, where there's snow, where there's ice, and all of those environmental factors shape them, into looking and acting how they are. Now, when we think about how acting how they are, there's a scholar named Cheikh Anta Diop, and he has what is often referred to as a two-cradle theory. So the northern cradle is a place where there aren't very many resources. If you're in snow and ice, that's where you get to a type of worldview where you say man versus nature. Only the strong survive. Survival of the fittest, might makes right. All of the things that Europeans are known for in terms of how they view the world. That if you're in a place where there are very few resources, let's say you and I are locked in this room and there is only one loaf of bread, the resources are going to get scarce very quickly, and it comes to a point where either I survive or you survive. And that's really over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Now, if you look at a text called the Instructions of Merikare, this is going to the Nile Valley, ancient Kemet, what Europeans like to call Egypt, which in and of itself is derived from the term Butka Ptah, which is the enclosure of the soul of Ptah, the creator deity. It went into Greek as Aegyptos. Now, if you look at the Instructions of Merikare, we're going to go back to that. They talk about what I call the Amu. These are the Eurasians, the same Eurasians that we're talking about, because after the glaciation period, they were there, they whitened. Now some of them started to come out of that area and populate other places. So some went this way straight into what we now know as Asia. Others went into Europe, and then you start to have a backflow after they've already been changed. And these are those who as Arabs and others. They've already had their melanin depleted. Now they're coming back closer. Now they're talking about these same Eurasians, and it says, "Lo, the miserable Asiatic," saying these are the same ones. He's miserable because of the place he's in, bare of wood, short of water, and basically it talks about they behave the way they behave because they're in a place with little to no resources. So now, they're trying, always warlike, they're always doing all these things because that's the environment that they've been bred in. You have studies where scientists will test rats and, have experimental group or control group, and they'll have one group of rats where there's a lot of space, they have food, they have wheels to run on, it's, a very nice environment. Then they have another group where they plop all of them down on top of each other, very little food, very little water. It got to the point where they said that they can calculate down to about a minute when the fights will break out. You understand? So picture that type of experiment, and now you have a whole subcontinent, because Europe isn't a continent, They will tell you that you can look at the map and see it's not a continent. It's part of Eurasia, but because Europeans like to make themselves feel good, they'll say, look at our continent of Europe. Anyone who says Europe is a continent either doesn't understand English or they listen to white people. But anyway, you have them coming from Europe and coming back. And basically what Sheikh Anta Diop talks about in terms of the two cradle theory is the exact same thing that the Africans in the Nile Valley were talking about, saying look at how they behaved. They behaved because they were in a place without resources. Now you can understand it in terms of just a short period, or if you don't have resources then you act like that. But what type of effect does that have on your mentality stretched across thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years? We can see very clearly because every place that these Eurasians have gone to on the face of the entire planet, they've committed genocide, biological warfare, chemical warfare, wholesale slaughter, so forth and so on. We can give examples like the Arawak people, and what was called Hispaniola at the time, Dominican Republic, Haiti. You can look at what they did when they were unleashed on the Africans who were there in Tasmania, where you can see pictures of Truganini, the very last one, full-blooded Tasmanian. At that time, she looks more African than anyone you'll see in Ghana, right? But they exterminated all of them, same thing they did in Australia. You can look at, coming closer to our time, the very first Holocaust that the Germans did wasn't in Germany against the so-called Jews. It was in Namibia against the Herero people and Namakwa people. So you have all these examples, every single, you can't find a counterexample. Every place that they ever went, the Belgians, the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, always the exact same thing. So you can see if you are in that type of situation over thousands of years, it's like a science experiment. We can see clearly what will happen to you, if you do that. So that's that. But we were coming closer to now the forced migration. So you had Africans who were stolen across the Sahara, through the Indian Ocean, and some of the first revolutions, when we talk about rebellions and revolutions, uprisings of enslaved Africans, we think about the Western Hemisphere, but the very first one was the Zanj people, and that's where you get the term Zanzibar, that's where you get Azania, all those Zan is coming from. That was the term that was used for African people. So in the Arabian Peninsula, around the area of Yemen, you had these Africans who had an uprising, who were able to defeat and hold off, these Arabs who were trying to enslave them. You can go to there, you can look, even to this day, that the Trans-Saharan, the one that the Arabs perpetrate, is still going on. So you still have, matter of fact, there was a movie that was based on a true story of one woman. They raided her village, enslaved her. She ended up working in, I want to say, Saudi Arabia somewhere. They ended up sending her to a cousin in England. She happenstance came across someone who spoke her same language, and she was able to escape, and this became a huge thing. They made a movie, it's called I Am Slave, so you can look that up. But it's still going on to this very day. And then you have the transatlantic, that's the one that we think of as well. Now, before we go there, let's take it back as well. You will find in Tres Aportes, La Venta, throughout Mexico, you have, let's say Mexico is like this, southeastern Mexico. You have all of these pyramids, you have all these stone heads, and when you look at the heads, they call them the Olmec heads. All of them are African people. It looks just like how you're looking at me right now, but carved in stone, high as the door, from the ground up to the door, a solid boulder of stone, carved, looking exactly like you. Now, in, I want to say somewhere around the 50s or 60s, this Scandinavian Heyerdahl, he wanted to do an experiment to see if the ships that Africans were making could cross the Atlantic, because to cross the Atlantic, all you have to do is put your ship on the ocean, and the currents will literally take you right there. So African people have been sailing in ships for thousands and thousands of years. We invented ships So, it's logical that, okay, we would, go there. And you find all these examples. Matter of fact, and I mentioned Ivan Van Sertima before, and they came before Columbus, African presence in early Americas. They give all of this evidence, including they ended up doing studies in metallurgy in order to show that the gold tips of the spears, the gold was mined in Africa. You can't find that type of gold anywhere in the so-called New World. So all of this goes to the point of Africans traveled from here. And in the 50s or 60s, I have to find the exact date, this guy Heyerdahl, first they tried to use the papyrus reed boats that they use in Kemet to this day to do it. They wanted to, show the smallest one to see if it would do that. And they got close, but it failed. So what they ended up doing is going to that jet black Africans who used to be in the Nile Valley and Lake Chad, and they're still making these types of ships that they used to make, because Kemet has been invaded, so the people you find there aren't the original people who are there, and we'll come to that because I see that's one of your questions. Yeah. But they went to the original people who used to be on the Nile Valley in Lake Chad, and that one was able to succeed. So it showed that very clearly African ships, just the most primitive type of ship. Now we had huge ships, and if you go to the pyramids of Giza, and I got a chance to go there, they have these huge ships. As a matter of fact, they have a book called African Philosophy of the Pharaonic Period by Theophile Obenga. I think I have it around, but I want you to see that book when I find it. But he goes into the dimensions of this huge ship, huge by any standard. And so if they were able to get there with the most primitive type of ship we use, then by all means, some of the more advanced, ones would definitely make it. So you have all of these, all this evidence, and I've actually gotten a chance to touch one of these huge Olmec heads, and you'll look at it, you think like you're looking in the mirror. You understand? Now, just like anything, because Europeans, they're not interested in truth at all. They're interested in survival. And this is something that one of our more recent ancestors, Francis Cress Welsing, used to talk about, that they're concerned about white genetic annihilation, right? That because the majority of the world are non-white people, they see that they're in the minority, so they're trying to do whatever they can. It's like a water training. It's saying like a snake that's inside it. It's trying to right.
It has to survive.
Yeah, so they're struggling in that same type of manner. So when they see these images of people who look just like Marcus Garvey that you see up here on the top right, they say, oh, it must be that their tools weren't sharp enough to make their noses sharp like how Europeans are. Oh, they must. But if you look at it, they have the most minute details showing that they have cornrows, just like this, how we still braid and stuff. It shows so many minute details, but how come you're detailed enough to do this, but you're not detailed enough to? So Europeans are a trip, and you can't, it's to the point where you can't even talk to them because it's so illogical, so irrational. Even in the face of an ocean of evidence, they'll be trying to come up. So you don't talk to them. That's not your audience. You understand? Because it would be like if I tell you stop breathing right now. Will you listen to me?
No, I can't listen.
You can't listen.
I don't either. My consciousness level will start.
You understand? So just like how you can't listen if someone says stop breathing, it's by the same token that they can't listen if anything like truth comes to them, because they see it like a matter of their survival. If black people were great, that means we're not as good as we pretend to be, because we're only as good as black people are bad. You understand? So if you say black people are here, to them that means that they're here and they can't accept that. So by the same, like how you see your very survival and it's true is tied to breathing, that's how their very survival is tied to all the lies. You understand? So they say they discovered, Christopher Columbus discovered America. That's what they tell you. And they'll even have Columbus Day. Now there are people who are already there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But So, you can't discover someone who's already there. It'll be like if you came into my office and say, I discovered your office. It's like, I'm here. Look, you see, I have my books here. I've been here. Like, no, I discovered because this is my first time coming. So now it's discovered. So they're not interested in truth at all. If any of them were interested in truth, there wouldn't be anything called a Columbus Day. You understand? If any were sincere, they would say, you know what, we have to go talk to our other cousins here and have them correct all the lies. They wouldn't be coming up with movies like Gods of Egypt and all these other ones where it's supposed to be set in the Nile Valley, where everyone depicted themselves as black, showed themselves as black. The name for themselves is Kemet, which means black people. But then you take all these American actors and British actors and you put them there, and they can't even be there without putting on sunscreen every day. They can't even stand in the sun.
Yeah.
So you're saying that they were the ones who were there. They can't even tolerate the environment? Are you serious? Whereas I was just there, and I felt like a battery being charged up. I'm standing in the sun for like, I told you, I took 2,000 pictures at the Temple of Hatshepsut, Jesu. And the Arab guide who was there said, how can you stand in there for 3 hours? You are in the sun, the heat of the sun. And this was the camera I was using. The camera was overheating. Like I had to turn it off. Otherwise, it literally, the in parts of it. And I didn't even know it had a setting. There's a setting on there, a temperature setting. So if it overheats, it'll, give you a warning and start, doing whatever to let you know. So I just turned it off. I'm waiting for it to cool down. I was putting it into the shade for a minute, and I'm like, okay. But, I literally felt charged up. And if you look at how we depicted ourselves at that time, it's wearing just like the lower part, like a cloth, like how you'll see at different shrines, when someone's pouring libation over the lower part. And they depicted themselves, my color, your color, wearing just that. So they didn't need sunscreen because they're like, yes, the sun. And the whole civilization was very heliocentric, so surrounds the sun. So the name's Ramesses. It means born of the sun. It's like you're bragging about how black you are. It's like we know the sun causes us to be black, so all of our names, all of our deities, everything is going to surround, the sun. So anyway, to come back to how we found ourselves where we are, we traveled there, we sailed there in ships. So you can still find pockets of communities throughout the entire world, even places that have been overrun by like the Aryans in India, other places, Papua New Guinea, you have these Indonesians and others who are trying to encroach on their territory. You can still find these black people throughout the entire world. You understand? So that's how we came to find ourselves where we are. So you had the voluntary migration, you had the forced migration, and then after that you have the manipulated migration. That's the stage that we're in right now. And the manipulated migration, let me hold this. That is where Europeans destroy your economy to make you want to go across the Mediterranean in a tiny boat, right? So people are dying by the hundreds trying to cross the Sahara in order to escape, quote unquote, into Europe. And the reason why they're doing that is because Europeans have stolen all of our wealth. You understand? So they think, oh, I just want to do it. No, you've been manipulated. It's like, let's say this room is filled with food, right? And you're here, you have no problem. You're just eating as you like. Let's say I come in here and I steal all the food away, right? And then I lock you in. At a certain point, you're going to start getting hungry, and you're going to try to do it. Now you'll say, "Oh, I want to leave just because I want to leave." No, it's because of the things that I did to your environment to make it almost unlivable or completely unlivable. That makes you say, "Now I want to leave." You understand? So that's where we're in now. When you see people trying to get their visa in the visa lottery, standing in queues, it's because they've stolen. So whenever you look at how built up America is, America can't be built up. It's like principles of physics. Two things can't be in the same place at the same time. Two things can't be built up to that degree at the same time. So whereas Africa will be up there, as they go up, they're stealing all of this from Africa. You understand? So as they're going up, you're going down. You can't be here unless they're there. They can't be here unless you are here. You understand? There's only so much wealth. There's only so much gold on the planet. So if they're stealing all of your gold from you, you understand? You can't be up there at the same time. So if you go to Paris, you'll see the domes made out of gold. On the top of it's like yeah. And it's like we've stolen so much of your gold, let's just decorate with it now. You understand? They say that when the Africans in the Congo were trying to get their independence from Belgium, when they went there is really when they got fired up, because they went there and saw all these palaces, they saw the gold encrusted chandeliers and everything, and they realized all of this comes from Congo. You understand? Like they're not mining for any of this in Belgium. Belgium is the size of this room basically. So they're taking all of this wealth from the Congo. So that was one of the things Patrice Lumumba was trying to do. Just to say, let us benefit from our own resources. And Europeans are not interested in that. To tell them, let us benefit from our own resources is like telling them stop breathing. And they're very used to breathing. So, voluntary, forced, manipulated. Significant achievements of black people in ancient times and in recent history. That's why I'll point you to a lecture that I gave, Why Kemet Matters. And in it, I'll go into how African people invented writing, right? 3400 BCE, and that's about 5,400 years ago. You find these ivory tags, and it's the very first stage of what we now know as hieroglyphs, right? Egyptian hieroglyphs is what they call it. And the language was called Medu-Neter, which are words of the divine, words of the divinity. So you have examples like that. The very first examples of combat science, what they call martial arts. I don't like to use that term because it's very anachronistic. Mars is this. You have the Greeks and Romans. They had their gods of war. So Mars is a Roman god of war. There was nothing called Rome at the time where we were doing this. So why are we saying martial? Because martial comes from the word Mars. So these are their gods of war. So they're saying we're doing martial arts. You understand? So if this thing existed 3,000 years before there was anything called Rome, there was no Rome, much less a Mars. So why are we calling this thing that predated in martial arts? You understand? So people look at the indigenous deity of combat sciences in Kemet, which we call Munchu. So some people like to say Munchu arts and things like that. But if you go to what is now known as Beni Hassan in the country of Egypt, you'll find in these tombs the oldest depictions, and you'll see murals that show every single type of wrestling position, striking, all of these things. And this is 5,000 years ago, 3,000 BCE, you understand? So these are things that any child should grow up knowing, but if you're black, they don't care about truth or telling you anything about what you did. They care about breathing. Because if you knew this, you wouldn't keep letting them steal all of your resources. You would be like, you all are small children, how dare you, try to do anything, to it. So they have a very concerted, effort to make sure that you don't learn about any of these things. But in that lecture, I go through every, area. The book that I was mentioning again, African Philosophy, the Pharaonic Period, is the same thing, where he gives actual texts, where he quotes it. He'll show what the text says in Medu-Neter, give the translation, and show how this shows how we had fine linen in the Nile Valley, because he's talking about I was dressed in this linen when I came back. That's the story of Sanhat.
But they used to say, some of them say when they came here to discover us, or when they came here to help, and that's we were not in clothes. I mean, we were naked and all those things. So I think to know something like this is helpful. Yeah.
So if you are interested in the original text, it's the oldest literary piece, in terms of an epic in the entire world. It's called Sanhat, and the author Aikwe Ama and his group is called Per-Am Publishers, the African Publishing Collective. That they've come together and they were able to translate this into Fante, into Wolof from Senegal, into Isizulu from South Africa, into Kikongo from Congo, and I want to say, Lingala, right? And then also into English, Portuguese, and French. So I have all these languages. So if you're interested in reading it, you can read the Medu itself. That's the so-called hieroglyphs. And then you can read the transliteration and then the translation in any language that you choose, right? And then you can go back and verify if you believe it. Then you can, it's been translated, hundreds of times. So that's that. Ship making, again, Obinga goes into this. He talks about the royal bark that they found next to the Great Pyramid of Giza, the solar boat they called it, and all these different areas. Mathematics. Now you have to go back even further than the Nile Valley. They have what is called the Limbombo bone and the Ishango bone, and these were fibula of baboons that they marked, and this goes back 37,000 years ago. That's a long time. And on it, they were doing multiplication. They were carving multiplication into it, division into it, prime numbers into it. So this is the very first, any mathematics on the entire planet being done by any human. And it's pretty advanced mathematics for that time when you think about it. Prime numbers, this is something that Europeans think that they just invented recently. And you'll wonder why the fibula of a baboon, if you're thinking about it. Now, if you go to ancient Kemet, Jehuti was a deity associated with math and writing, and he was also represented by a baboon. And why a baboon? Baboons were associated with the moon. They were associated with howling at the moon, either when it's full or at dawn. So there was this analogy, this metaphorical connection, that if we want to talk about the moon, and those bones were seen as being calculations of women's menstrual cycles, being related to that. So if we want to show you that we understand the math connected with the moon and how it affects us and our bodies, then let's use an animal's bone who is associated with the moon. And then also in ancient Kemet, that same deity Jehuti was also associated with the moon. You understand? So it's like, let's weave this entire thing to show you that we understand very clearly where we're doing it. Because we could have used the fibula of a lion, we could have used the fibula of an antelope, but so both of the bones, and it's about, the Ishango bone came later, I want to say around 22,000 years ago. Both of them, and this is across thousands of years, both of them are using fibula of baboons. They're telling you something that we understand very clearly why we're doing math and why we're associating math with the baboon. And you find this all the way through the Nile Valley, where they still associate with the deity who is said to have invented math with a baboon, right? So we can go through every area of human activity, mathematics, the so-called Pythagorean theorem. You find that the inner chambers of the Great Pyramid were built on dimensions of 3, 4, 5. So not only were we telling you that we understand the mathematics, we're going to do it on the grandest scale that any human being has ever done or will ever do. And in the location, it's interesting, like when you think about where the Great Pyramid of Giza is, if you look at all of the land across Africa, the widest portion of Africa, and then you add in the widest portion of Asia, and then the widest portion of the Western Hemisphere, the Americas. If you add up the longest, the Great Pyramid is exactly placed on where the land is the longest on either side and either side. To know that, that means you had to have measured that on this side and measured that on this side. But that's not all. If you measure where, all the way from, they talk about from Cairo to Cape Town, right? If you measure the entire length of Africa, right? And then you add in the entire length of Eurasia that's here, all the length of Antarctica, that's also the longest land mass in that direction. That means in order to do that, you can't guess that. You understand? Yeah. There's no other place on the planet that has the longest length here, the longest length here, and the Great Pyramid is right on that spot, and it's aligned within less than 1 single degree with true north, south, east, west. If we build this building, we can't do it that accurately using all of the GPS signals and all the whatever. We can't do it to that degree of accuracy much less as how huge the structure is. So you're looking at how huge the structure is, and the corners are perfectly north, south, east, west. And they're perfectly in the only spot on the entire planet Earth that has the longest landmass here, longest landmass here. All right, so you say how many kilometers go from there all the way down, how many kilometers of Eurasia, how many kilometers, that if you move it over just, you know, a kilometer, you're in the wrong spot. If you move it a kilometer, you know, north or south, you're in the wrong spot. You understand? So all of these things are things that we aren't told about, but you can easily verify, you know, yourself. Other scholars, mainly European scholars, have built their whole careers on this. So you have archaeoastronomy that also shows how this pyramid is not only aligned in terms of what's going on Earth, it's also aligned with stars. And that's what they used to date. It was an article in Nature journal that they're able to calculate when the pyramid was built based on, there are these what they call air shafts. They're actually celestial shafts because they show exactly where you can, if you're looking from inside, where you can see the star only every several thousands of years. So when they see when that star was in its place, and then on the other side when this star was in its place, it was only around, let's say around 4,000 some odd years ago. So that's how they're able to date it, because of how they aligned the pyramid with where those stars were going to be at that exact point in time. You understand? And there are other correlations as well with that. So if we're talking about significant achievements of black people, you have to list just about every single area of human activity. If you want to talk about recent history, we have a poster up top which shows inventions by black people, such as a PC. Dr. Mark Dean worked at IBM, and he has the majority of sole patents on the PC. So he worked with a team. He has more than anyone else in the team.
I told computer is from the black.
Yeah. And even, you know, it's not even necessary for them to tell you that. People will just guess, oh, it must be from the white man, right? And the paradox, or the thing that's ironic about that, is that, I hope this is recording. The thing that is ironic about that is African people, you know, that we were taken there in order to work, but once we're there working, you know, it's like, well, it's like we don't know that we were there doing something. So if you know we were taken there to work, well, what work did we do, right? So you have Louis Latimer, you know, working on the light bulb. You have, and he also was a draftsman for some of the ones who they claim were their best inventors. So he was the one who did the drafting for, who was this, Graham Bell, for Edison, for all these other ones. So he was the one who did all of that. Now he was also operating at a time where if you are doing these things, it's going to be a problem if you say I'm the inventor, because they'll lynch you, they'll kill you. So even the ones that we know about, we're lucky to even know about those, because there had to be many more who just weren't able to do that, because either the one who was enslaving them got the credit for it, even though, and most of these inventions are things that were designed to make work easier. Now why are people who are enslaving you trying to make work easier for you? They don't care. You understand? But you are the one who was doing, you know, this thing. You have Garrett A. Morgan worked on the gas mask, which made a major difference, you know, in the so-called world wars. So, you know, we can go up, but you have this list and it has about 200 or some inventors. Brim? Okay. Thank you very much. So I won the award for the best publication for this year.
Wow.
And they just brought me my and they spelled my name correctly, which I'm so happy about. So citation, I'll clean that up. 2016 Provost Publications Award Early Career Citation. This award is presented to Dr. Obadele Kambon, Research Fellow, Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana as the winner of the 2016 Provost Publications Award Early Career. The award is based on your paper titled Theory of Endogenous and Exogenous Motivation and L2 Migration, which was published in Perlinguam 31, issue 2, 2015. Your article has been noted to be a great input in the area of language teaching and learning, and this work will be used by many researchers and foreign language teachers. Also, your work is deemed as provocative, perceptive, and a well-researched paper that has unmistakable relevance for the teaching and learning of foreign languages and target languages. Your write-up is an original contribution which challenges current theories that account for second language acquisition. Dr. Albadale Kambon, for your outstanding contribution to knowledge and scholarship and for breaking new grounds, the College of Humanities is proud to award you the 2016 Provost Publications Award Early Career. Congratulations, Professor Samuel Agyemnasa. Very good. This is perfect timing. So I'll find a place to hang that up somewhere around here. I won the award for the best PhD thesis when I came out in 2012. So I have that one at home. But I may bring both of those here and put them somewhere. So significant achievements. If you go to African Inventions, there's a site, Kumato, Kumatoo, I think the spelling is. But if you just do a Google search for Kumato, and I think it's just .com, or maybe .org or something. But if you just do a search for African inventions, you'll see so many things invented by continental Africans as well. So these are people who dedicated their entire lives to, develop these things, from, remote controls, armored vehicles, all these things.
Control.
Yeah. Theorems and mathematics and so forth. Some even Ghanaians. So you have the Alote formalism, he's Ghanaian. So they devoted their entire life to show, look, black people, we can do it too. African people, we can do it too. But we never learn about them. So imagine if you go into science or math or engineering, you devote your whole life and then you develop a camera, right? A revolutionary 3D camera that can fly up and do whatever. Now you've done this, you've dedicated your whole life, but they never teach you in fresh. When do you learn about black inventors? They don't teach you in primary. They don't teach you in, JHS, secondary. You don't learn it in college. So you devoted your whole life, but there's nothing in the curriculum to teach about what African people have invented.
Yeah, one of my issues was that when I began to search and to learn, to find out whether black people have done anything of significance, I began to realize and see inventions of black people, which I thought were from the whites, and I know that the average Ghanaian doesn't have no clue.
If you go up and see this poster, it's enough to fill an entire city.
Oh,
it's enough to fill. So it's a poster that's drawn out like a city, and then it has everything numbered, so you can see what the name of the person was, what the patent number is. So it's not just people saying, "Oh, we did it." No, we registered the patents, and these are only the ones that we were able to register patents for, without being lynched, without being killed, without being maimed, without being brutalized. So the ones we actually invented, we can never know. These are just the ones that we have the patents for. You understand? So many other so-called white inventors, we have to be very skeptical about whether they ever invented anything other than something that kills people. Because when you invent something that kills people, now you can force everyone else to invent things for you and take the credit. And it's like, do you want credit or do you want a bullet in your head? Which you choose. Then you don't have to invent much of anything. You'll get other people to invent them for you. So, so many things. Golf tee, fountain pen, you'll go up and you'll see the whole city. Lemonade squeezing machines, all these types of things. Yeah. So, yes, we achieved a lot in ancient times, recent history. Is there or has there been any agendas to sabotage or malign black people? Very much so. And that's kind of the current that's going through everything that we've said. That Europeans know we invented all these things, but it's like, okay, will you start making movies about us inventing things? And it's interesting that when Europeans find that their backs are against the wall, they're coming out with a movie now about 3 black mathematicians who helped NASA win the space race. Right? So this is now going to be a movie. Now they knew about this ever since the space race, right? Why now?
Why didn't they talk about it?
Yeah. So anytime that they're willing to make any concessions is when they, feel like, oh, you know what, we better do something because the black people are on the rise. So let's give them some crumbs. It's like you have a dog who is about to chew your leg. You try to just throw something down and say, all right, don't bite my leg, bite the steak. All right, bite this one. So, but this is something that's been known ever since the days of Sputnik and all of these things. But how come we haven't known about it? And these aren't the only African mathematicians who contributed in these various areas. But it's not part of our curriculum growing up. You know what I'm saying? The Africans who, those Olmec heads are representations of, why don't we learn this? Because we didn't learn it in the diaspora, we don't learn it here on the continent. At what point in time do we ever learn any of this information? Because it would make quite a difference for us. We wouldn't allow them to do what they do in Africa if we knew this information, and that's why. You understand? It's like me saying stop reading. To tell them, okay, now that you know all this information, and matter of fact, in the same text I keep going back to, African philosophy, the Pharaonic period, he talks about how all throughout history it was never a debate that the Africans and Kemits, the so-called Egyptians, were black people. It was because if you look at them, it's you can look. And at the time,
no debate.
At the time, they were saying, "Oh, it's primitive, it's uninteresting because it's art negro, it's black art, just African people's whatever." Then when they started translating it and seeing how deep this is, they said, "You know what? These can't be black people. They're white people with black skin." Like literally, when you read the quotes, they're so ridiculous. They say you can't consider having black skin and woolly hair to make someone a Negro. They had to be white people because they're starting with the assumption, and this is an assumption that's coming out of, okay, these are people who were enslaving, who were colonizing, whatever. So we have to have a justification. And the justification is if they didn't do anything, now I'm doing a benevolent act by coming here and raping your women and stealing your children because I'm teaching you how to write in the Latin script, so it's a fair trade, right? But what if you know that you invented writing and the British haven't invented writing to this very date that we're seated here?
Concerning invention of writing,
yeah.
I when we were learning the earliest civilization in history, we were told about the Mesopotamian Valley and the writing that they invented. And for what I thought, or what I have known so far, I thought that the people of Mesopotamia were not black people. And then maybe... So
this is where we come, this is where we have to go back to. In 1999 in Nature Journal, they were actually published the very first instances of writing on the entire planet, dated to 3400 BCE. Now, writing in Mesopotamia is dated to around 3100 BCE. So just before we deal with were those people there, black or not, first we have to go into what came first. And the writing didn't start anywhere close to Mesopotamia. Like when you look at the Nile Valley, the Nile goes all the way up into the Mediterranean Sea. That the earliest examples were in Abydos, it was called Yebu, and then Kustu, which is even further south. So when you want to trace where writing started, you have to go as far away from Mesopotamia as you can get. And then when you look at how people traveled, how Nile traveled, the Nile Valley flows towards the north, right? So you're not coming with information and let's sail upstream and give these people some knowledge. First, the dates. Nile Valley came before, and then where it started came before as well. Now, when you look into the earliest examples of who's African and who's not, you look at something like the inscriptions of Winnie, right? And this was a general around the, I want to say, 3rd dynasty. So still early what they call Old Kingdom. And when he talks about who was coming together in order to fight these Asiatics, they combine all the black people, only the black people. So they say we're pulling together both sides of the Nile, north and south. We're pulling together all the different types of Nubians. And when we say Nubians, it's just another way of saying black people. The Warat Nubians, the Irjet Nubians, the Sajer Nubians, the Kau Nubians, Cheme, all of these people. And when we say Cheme, usually it's as far south as you can get and still be, in the Nile Valley dealing with, here's where the Sahara Desert is, here's where the Nile Valley is. It's basically, saying Sudan type of area, the west side. So they brought all these different types of black people together to fight these Eurasians. You understand? And in the book I'm writing, I'm dealing with that. That's the very first instance of Pan-Africanism, right? You got all these different types of black people coming together for a common goal, right? One aim, one destiny, like Marcus Garvey used to say. That's the very first instance that I've found in the written record where you can see African people coming together purposively in order to do something like defense or offense against our enemies. You understand? But when you look over time, that type of what led me to find this is that African people say Kemet means land of black people, right? Which is what it is. And then in Kemet, when you change the determinative of a man and a woman, now that same Kim, which means black, now you're saying black people. It's the same thing as saying Abi before. In Kemet, with the determinative of a crossroads, is the same thing as saying Abi Mine, like nation or land of black people, black people. And I was like, if this really means black people, and this was just a hypothesis, it was just a guess. I was like, in the earliest foundation where it was still clear that Kemet means black people, you should see in how they interact with others that they're going to try to bring other black people into it. They're going to try to, if they're trying to expand their land, I don't think that people who say this land means land of black people, I don't think they're going to go into Asia. I don't think they're going to go into the Mediterranean. I don't think they're going to go, west into the desert. If they're going to try to expand the land, they're going to expand the land into where more black people are. Because it means land of the black people. How are you going to bring in some white people when your nation means land of black people? So it was just a guess. Now, lo and behold, I started finding all these texts where they're saying, we are trying to incorporate these black people in. We're trying to incorporate the land of more black people, because Kemet means land of black people. We're going to try to have all black people under one political authority, one economic system, black people, right? And that's exactly what, I found. So if you can look it up, inscription of Winnie, and you can find it in translation, you can find it on so many sites. Also called the autobiography of Winnie. And when you read it, it'll blow your mind. So I just came with a guess. If it means black people, then at that point in time where it was still clear what we are supposed to be about, what we're supposed to be doing, in the earliest stages, we should be trying to come together and bring other black people together, right? And that's exactly what you find in this, early text. And then over time, you have where Kemet was a composite of all these different kinds of black people, but at a certain point, that composite of all these became just a fragment unto itself. So instead of seeing it like, let's keep bringing in more black people, now it just becomes, well, we're Kemet. We're fighting against people who aren't in Kemet. You understand? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like where we're losing that way. But the earliest, and what I'm doing in the book with a colleague is showing how this changed and how that change led to our downfall. Mm-hmm. So when we understand we're bringing all black people together, we have another 3,000 years in front of us. But as we start changing and seeing Kemet as just like a fragment and we're against everybody else, whether you're Nubian, whether you're whatever, we're just trying to keep our thing together. That's where you start letting in, Eurasians. That's where they start taking over and eventually defeat by the Greeks. And in the Greco-Roman era, you go from Winnie, which is the most Pan-African thing, to it's another text called Setne, Setne and Setosire, and in it is talking about, we are Kemet and we're fighting against Nubians. You understand? Mm-hmm. So it went from us all fighting together to now when you're under the Greeks and the Romans, you're talking about how we in Kemet are trying to fight against the Nubians. Something changed. The mindset changed. At that point, Kemet is meaningless. You understand? You went from understanding that we're all black people, we have to come together to fight these Eurasians, to now the Eurasians have conquered us. And where's it? And one of the most shocking things is like sacrilege is Amun. That was the major deity, and it was found in the south. Waset primarily was the locus. That you have so many of the rulers who have Amen in the name. When you pray, you say Amen, that's the name of that deity, Amen. Someone who's born on Onyami's day, Kwame, Ama. And if you want to respond to them when they greet you, say, yeah, Amen, that's the same, Amen, Amen, Amen. If you look at that time, so many of the rulers have the name Amen in their name. So it's like how the Yoruba do, they'll have Shango, which is a deity, and then Shango Dele, Ogun, which is a deity, Oguntunde, or whatever the thing is, right? It was just like that, where have Amen and then say what Amen is doing. So Amen Hotep, that's Amen is satisfied, right? Amen Imhat, that's Amen is in the front. You have so many of them, and that's Kemet, right? But in this text, the Greeks, they're saying, oh, you Nubian, you and your deity, Amen, right? You're trying to come here with your deity. It's like, wow. And that's probably the first instance I've ever read of propaganda of Europeans trying to set Africans against each other. You understand? And we can find so many examples in recent times. But the point of knowing history is to see the pattern. Like what happened the last time this happened. You understand? And then that will give you some, this is a quote here by Dr. John Henry Clark. He says, history is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day, as a compass to find themselves on the map of human geography, to tell what they have been, where they have been, what they are, and where they are, to tell where they still must go, who they are, where they are from, and what their potential is as a people. If it fails to do so, it is useless, right? So knowing this isn't just like, oh, look, I know this. It's supposed to tell me something. Like, if that's what happened the last time we allowed these Eurasians to come in, what should we be doing as a continent? Should we still be letting them in when we know it led to our downfall? But if we don't know any of it, how can we even? It's like now is the first experiment, right? As opposed to, well, we know what that experiment does. If you add this chemical to this chemical, it's an explosion. Now imagine this is the first time you do it and it explodes in your face. Okay, we can't blame you for that. You didn't know. But now imagine you take those exact same chemicals the next day and say, I wonder what's going to happen. This is what happens when you don't have a memory. Because these are, what happened in history is like science experiments. And you write down the results of your experiments, so now you have that and say that this is what the result is. But as insane as it would be to mix those chemicals again the next day, and then boom, it explodes in my face again. And then the next day, boom, that's how insane it is for us not to know this history. Because then we'll do the exact same thing again and again, and it keeps hurting us, and we have no idea, and we can't even remember to yesterday that it didn't work out well, right? A Eurasian says insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? This is Eurasians telling you this, but even still, they're perpetrating this against us. So yes, there has definitely been an agenda to sabotage and malign black people, and part of it is just by not letting us know anything outside of the past few hundred years. What more sabotage can you have than not knowing anything over the past few hundred years? If law operates on precedent, you understand? What's the precedent for this? Was there another case like this? Everything, law is all based on the documentation and history of this is where we've been, this is what we did in a similar situation, so that's what we should do now. Or, understand? But what if you have a law library that is all of your precedent and you run the whole thing down? You understand? Or like what they actually did, you put it in museums in London, in Paris, Paris, in Moscow, in Turin, Italy, all these places. This is where you found all the texts. So if you go through a list of every papyrus that's been found outside of Cairo, you won't find them in Africa. and it's only still there in Cairo because it's been overrun by Arabs. Understand? So they did study DNA tribes in 2012, 2013. Yeah, 2012 thereabout. They did a DNA test of Tutankhamun and Amenhotep III and other, members of the royal family, and they discovered that their closest genetic relatives are found in southern Africa, East Africa, around the Great Lakes region, that's Rwanda, Uganda, that area, West Africa, which is where we are, then the Sahel, and then the Horn of Africa, like every part of Africa before you get to North Africa. You understand? That means the people who are in North Africa now aren't related to those people who were there at that time. And it's very significant in terms of Amenhotep III, because some people would say, oh, well, Tutankhamun, he was descended from Queen T, who was known to be a Nubian. But Amenhotep he was from Kemet proper, and he married Queen T. So if he himself is related to all these Africans, other places, what are you telling us? You understand? So just keeping us into this 200, 300-year box of history, that's as much sabotage as you can do to anyone. To say, all right, we're going to start your history from when I came into the door. Imagine just when you came into the office, you say, you're not allowed to remember anything before I came into your office. So what if I want to go home and see my wife and children? I can't even remember that I have a wife and children. What if I want to change my clothes? I want to go home. I don't even know where my home is. How can I change? So you'll picture this crazy guy walking around. He doesn't have a memory beyond 20 minutes ago. How crazy would you be if you can't remember anything before 20 minutes ago? That's the equivalent of what has happened to us. Because if you think about the past 200, 300, 400 years, that is such a tiny fraction of history. I can't emphasize on how short a period of time that is. You understand?
Yeah, I get you.
It's like 20 minutes ago. So that's where we are. What are some of the things said about us which are not true? So the British, the French, they still haven't invented a writing system. As we're seated here today, you sitting in front of me, they haven't invented a writing system. We're still waiting. Whereas African people have invented writing time and time and time again. Some related, some independently of each other on different parts of the continent. So you look at Medu Neter, that's the first writing system in the history of the world. That's one. You can look at Meroitic. You can look at Ge'ez, right? That's what Amharic they use in Ethiopia. If you ever see how they write their signs and everything, that's Ge'ez. You can look at, come to West Africa, find Nsibidi, amongst the Igbo people and people of southeastern Nigeria. You can go to Cameroon and find Bamum.
He invented.
Yes, and that one is independent, right? So it's using a similar system. It looks like hieroglyphics, it looks like Medu Neter, but it's an entirely different system. So me coming knowing how to read and write Medu Neter, I wouldn't be able to read and write Bamum. It's in its own system. The Mende writing system, right? You find that to this day in Mali. They have an updated version, Nko. You have Vai, right? So you're thinking about Liberia, going into Sierra Leone, that area. So you can go time and time again throughout. There's a book called African Alphabets by the authors, I want to say Mafun Dikwa, if I'm getting it right. And he goes into all the writing systems that you find out. So that's one thing to know that we invented writing. It's another thing to be able to read it. You understand? So imagine, and I went to Kemet, I was always very concerned with how much these Eurasians have stolen. So you go to the London Museum, they have a whole section which is Kemet. You go to the Louvre, a whole section which is Kemet. You go to Berlin, Moscow, Italy. And I'm like, wow, they have stolen so much that we can't access unless we, go there. But then I got there, and I'm still very concerned about that. We have to go get our stuff. So don't get me wrong. But when I was there, I walked into Ipet-Sut. That was the indigenous name for what they call the Karnak Temple, the largest religious temple in the entire world ever. bigger than anything Vatican, whatever you want to name.
Where?
This is in Kemet,
Oh, okay.
right? What was called Waset, what nowadays they call Luxor. And what you see today is even smaller because the town has encroached on it. They've stolen some of the land that used to be temple land. But even now, in its smaller form, it's so huge. And every single square inch, millimeter, whatever system you want to use, you find carving, writings. You can't read everything in your lifetime. You understand? That's one temple. If you, and they say that at the time that we were there, from the age of 7, that's where you're allowed to be initiated into that temple. That's the temple to Amen, the same one I was talking about before. That the earliest they'll take you is when you're 7 years old, and you graduate after 40 years of being in the temple. So as I was walking through there trying to take pictures, that's why I took 15,000 pictures while I was there over the course of like 10 days or so. As I was there, I was like, if I spent 40 years just trying to read what's there, that could be the 40 years alone. So picture I'm not doing anything else. I'm just reading what's carved there. That alone could be 40 years. You understand? That's before I learned the rituals of, this is where we take Amen from Epet Soup to Epet Resi, so forth and so on. That's before I do anything else, just to read it. So my point of view was that if my ancestors thought it was important enough to carve into stone, then certainly it's important enough for me to take a picture of, so that we can get our chematology department, here eventually, because it's not here in Africa. We invented it, we did it all, but if you want to learn, you have to go to London, you have to go to Brown University, all these various places in the world. And if I think about the campus that we're on right now, it's a university institution of higher learning. You can't find anyone on campus who knows how to read and write anything in any of those African languages that I mentioned. It's like, I can't remember past 20 minutes ago. If all you can read and write is a Latin script, you're functionally illiterate. If all you can read and write is Greek, it's like you're illiterate. Because beyond just patting yourself on the back and say, yes, we invented writing, what are the lessons that are in that writing? You understand? What were your ancestors, what did they think was important enough that they're going to drag a stone for kilometers, stack them on top of each other into a perfect alignment, and then carve into those stones? That's pretty important. I can't get you to do whatever you think is important to you, your wife, your children, I don't know. But whatever you think is important to you, I would be very hard pressed to convince you to go drag a stone and carve in whatever about your wife. You understand? So what do your ancestors think is so important that they are going to go through all of that effort so that you can be able to read it? I hope it's putting it in perspective. So yeah, that's just on writing. You said, what have they told us that aren't true? A lot of them kind of stem out from that. It's just this idea that before we came, you weren't doing much. You didn't have cities. Where we can go to Monomatapa, a huge stone structure in what's now Zimbabwe. You can go to Great Zimbabwe, huge stone structure done just like how they did these huge stone structures in the Nile Valley, right? In South Africa, they found it's a system of all these huge, it's like Great Zimbabwe, but it's an entire system of cities, all made in stone, and they've dated it, the stone is called dolerite, and based on, dating how long it takes it to weather a way through erosion and other things, they say, you know what, these had to have been here at least 200,000 years ago. You understand? And close by they found mines and all these. So this is very high technology. You understand? So when they say you weren't doing much, all of it is basically to justify them doing what they consider as important as breathing, which is having their foot on your neck, and they're not willing to stop breathing anytime soon. So yeah, just about everything they say comes from that general idea that you weren't doing much, right? So you have to thank me for bringing you into history. Karl Marx said it, Hume, Hegel, all these ones who they like to cite, all of them were very much racist. And the problem is when we ourselves as Africans, that's all we read. That's all we know. We can't read Medu Neter, what you see here on this island. So if our only source of information is them, what other thoughts can we have beside them? You understand?
Yeah.
So that's why the work of Cheikh Anta Diop, Theophilo Obenga is so compelling and so necessary, and many others who do the same work, you know. But those are some of the forerunners who, there's a quote by Jacob Carruthers that I really like. He also worked a lot on Medu Neter. He has a book called Medu Neter. May have it here, may have it in a soft copy. But he says, African champions must listen to the voice of the ancestors without European interpreters. Listen to the voice of the ancestors without European interpreters. Now to do that, that means you go to the original text and you read it yourself. You don't wait for them to give you a translation or tell you, oh, look at the picture. Yes, they look black, but really they're dark-skinned white people. So don't worry about them. You don't need to know anything about them. If they really believe that, because they don't have any problem telling you about Plato. They don't have any problem telling you about Socrates, Aristotle, because those are actual white folks. Now, if these people in Kemet who Plato says that's where you go to get your education, because the education of the Greeks is like that of guzzling swine. So to become more human,
Plato said that.
So look in the Republic, look in the laws, look at his own opinion about the Greeks. And then in there he also talks about how much he had to pay in order to go from Greece, what we now know as Greece, to the Nile Valley to get his education. Thales, Solon, you know, the first philosopher, Thales, studied in Kemet. Solon, the so-called lawgiver, studied in Kemet. All of the ones who they say are whatever studied in Kemet or stole the text from Kemet, but they themselves say this is where we went to get the information.
But this what you just said, it's mind blowing to me, because we look up to the West.
Because you don't know anything about the West.
Education, and we believe maybe to some extent they have brought us civilization and stuff like that. And the people the West depend on is this Plato. They quote them. Plato.
But they don't quote those passages.
Socrates, yes. So I can't believe that Plato can mention a thing like that. And their education is.
Yeah, let me give
and
you.
I want to have some information on that.
Yeah, no problem. We actually had this discussion about the Gandhi statue here because Gandhi was so racist, and some of this information came up. So I gave them plenty of quotes at the time.
Wow.
Okay, so here's a quote from Plato. He says, "One ought to declare then that the freeborn children should learn as much of these subjects as the innumerable crowd of children in Egypt learn along with their letters," Egypt being Kemet. "First, as regards counting, lessons have been invented for the merest infants to learn. By way of play and fun, modes of dividing up apples and chaplets, so that the same totals are adjusted to larger and smaller groups." So this is how we taught mathematics at that time. "And modes of sorting out boxers and wrestlers in bys and pairs, taking them alternately or consecutively in their natural order." This is Plato talking. Moreover, by way of play, the teachers mix together bowls made of gold, bronze, silver, and the like, and others distribute them, as I said, by groups of a single kind, adapting the rules of elementary arithmetic to play, and thus they are of service to the pupil. And it's like Owari, is algebra. To play Owari and do well, you're doing algebra.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're solving for x, right? We'll come back to that. And thus they are of service to the pupils for their future tasks of drilling, leading, and marching armies, or of household management, and they render them both more helpful in every way to themselves and more alert. the next step of the teachers is to clear away by lessons and weights and measures. That's what we used to do to measure gold. So you have our gold weights collection. So they say they clear away and by lessons and weights and measures a certain kind of ignorance, both absurd and disgraceful, which is naturally inherent in all men touching lines, surfaces, and solids. What ignorance do you mean? So this is Clinias, who was talking to Plato. And of what kind is it? And now Plato is talking about here is the Greeks. My dear Clinias, when I was told quite lately of our condition in regard to this matter, I was utterly astounded. So our is saying this is of the Greeks. I was utterly astounded myself. It seemed to me to be the condition of guzzling swine rather than of human beings. Human beings is us, black people. And I was ashamed, not only of myself, but of all the Greek world. So this is Plato. You can find it in the Republic. You can also find it in the Laws.
I have a pen right here. Can I?
Yeah.
This one.
As for this fellow, to say nothing of his dark skin and protruding lips. So this is now another Greek talking about how he knew that they were Egyptian. He said, as for this fellow, to say nothing of his dark skin and protruding lips, he's talking about us, and spindle shanks, he's talking about Yuan Konghia, like Anansi's child. His words came out tumbling in a heap, one on top of another. It was Greek, of course, but the voice, the accent were Egyptian born. So you know that he wasn't really Greek because of how dark he is, but then also because of his Egyptian accent, right? And then his hair, no free man had ever tied his hair up in a knot behind like that. So he's talking about this. Oh, but that is a sign of noble birth in Egypt, Licinus. All gentlemen's sons wear their hair done up till they reach manhood. It was the other way. It was the other way with our ancestors. Talking about the Greeks, they didn't do this, right? The top knot, the golden grasshopper, to keep it together, were the proper thing for old men in their time. So he's talking about the cultural differences, the physical differences, the linguistic differences. To know that they're Egyptian, you know that they're black, right? So these are your Greeks talking.
So there was no question about it
at all until they realized how profound it was. Then they started trying to come up with excuses. Oh, well, they're dark-skinned white people. They're not black. Exactly. They said no, they weren't black. They weren't Negroes. They were red.
You can't handle it.
It's like me telling you stop breathing. Their very existence depends on all of these lies. They built a whole castle on the sand, and now we're going to ask them to move it. Right?
Yeah.
They would rather just go down with the castle than to say, you know what, we did wrong. Let's start deconstructing it one by one and put it in a good place. You understand? They're not willing to do that because all the things they built up are built up on lies. And our willingness to assist them in continuing to build it up is built on lies. So if we come to these are lies, we'll stop building for them. Just about everybody in this university, when they graduate, they want to go and help them build it up further. You understand? But what if you realize that's not what we're supposed to be building up? We're supposed to be building up our own thing. You know, two objects can't be in the same place at the same time. This is physics, right? So you can't be there building up their thing and at the same time be here building up your thing. You understand? So they're very intent to keep us saying, oh, you know what? The Europeans have invented everything. Let's keep helping them to build up. Then I'll get some crumbs that they throw down to me and everything will be well. The crumbs is a Mercedes, Benz, and whatever else that they throw to us. That we don't want a car factory. I have a friend, and he's like so many people. He wants a private jet at sometime in the future. He's so broke he barely has a car, but he wants a private jet. And I'm like, for me, the thinking is so backwards because instead of wanting a private jet, he should want to produce a jet factory here in Africa. Instead of wanting a Mercedes-Benz, he should want a car factory here in Africa. If you just think about all the Mercedes-Benzes that all these big people drive throughout Africa, the money from only, I'm not talking about BMW, I'm not talking about Toyota.
I talked about the cars.
If we only look at the money that is spent in Africa on Mercedes-Benzes, that money is enough to build a car factory probably the size of Togo. Just the Mercedes-Benz. The factory would be the size of probably a small country. At least Equatorial Guinea.
You have to rethink.
So the whole thing is that they can't be, and this is Amos Wilson, a great psychologist who talked about this, he said they can't be where they are unless we are where we are. So it's like in our minds we refuse. So I have a website, Abibutumi Black people would rather go to Facebook and talk about, yes, less African liberation. They would rather be building up Facebook than to assist in building up the African one. You understand? Facebook can't be where it is unless black people are helping it, and everybody else, but black people are the ones who I'm concerned with. And as opposed to saying, you know what, let's stop building up these things for white folks. So even the ones who are supposedly conscious, who know some of this information, they're still helping to build up white stuff. But they can't be where they are if we say, you know what, we're going to take the foundation out from underneath them. You're standing on a ladder, I'm going to pull the ladder. Without our African ladder, they can't stand where they are. Yeah. So the only way that they're able to stay in their position is our adamant refusal to stop supporting them. You understand? In our Visa Lotto, when we give them money, they say there's more doctors in abroad in America than there are in Ghana. Got more Ghanaian doctors abroad in America and in the UK than there are in Ghana. Ghanaian doctors, more there than here. But imagine if they said we're not going to be paying taxes here anymore. We're not going to be paying rent in the UK anymore. We are taking all of our services back to Africa. The whole thing would collapse. It's like Buhari. Cameron said they're so corrupt. He said, well, just give us back our money back.
That's one thing. The past
the UK would collapse.
Madagascar, is it Madagascan president, the woman? She said he came and fought corruption, and they arrested a few officials and all that. And now when they realize where some of them sent the money, they are asking for the money back. They refuse to bring the money.
Because the UK would fall today if they repatriated all the money just from the corruption, not from the ones that they stole during colonialism and all that. If you only say just the corruption ones, because who is the one who is getting them to be corrupt? Like when you think about when Nkrumah was overthrown, there's a documentary called Black Power.
Can I get that one?
Oh, it's online. The whole thing is online. And it's called Black Power. Yeah. And it talks about how Kwame Nkrumah was trying to get the Akosombo down. You know, it's talking about power, this type of power, but it's the idea of black power.
Okay.
And they talk about how they were able to drain the coffers, the money of the state of Ghana, and it was through them intentionally sending agents here in order to, let me come and talk to this one. Oh, if you give me this grant, you know, or give me these funds for whatever, then I will give you this car, this house, this whatever. So they went intentionally one by one to get the weak links in the chain to drain the funds. So all of this was intentional because the plan was from outside for the CIA to topple Nkrumah, because they said there was no other leader in Africa who was thwarting their attempts more than Nkrumah. So Ghanaians will say, oh, you drained our coffers in Nkrumah, we're getting rid of you. But they don't understand that all of that was planned by the CIA from outside. So you think that you're doing your own thing, but you're just reacting to the manipulation and the situation that they played in order to do their thing. So I'll come back to Aristotle. This is another quote. This is Physiognomics, book, what is this, 14. Why are the Ethiopians and Egyptians bandy-legged? It's talking about how if you see NBA players, it is because their bodies of living creatures become distorted by heat. Talking about the sun. That's what makes us so black in how we look. Like logs of wood when they become dry, the condition of their hair supports this theory. It's saying this, for it's curlier than that of other nations, and curliness, as it were, crookedness of the hair. So this is Aristotle talking about why people are their physiognomy. And I gave about 20 or so quotations. Herodotus, who says, lastly, by calling the dove black, the Dodonians indicated that the woman was an Egyptian. And certainly the character of the oracles at Thebes and Dodona is very similar. Besides this form of divination, the Greeks also learned divination by means of victims from the Egyptian. Diodorus Siculus, he says, There are also numerous other Ethiopian tribes besides those centered at Meroe. Some live along both sides of the river Nile and on the islands in the river. Others dwell in the regions that border on Arabia to the east. Others again have settled in the interior of Libya to the west. The majority of these tribes, in particular those who live along the river, have black skin, snub-nosed faces, and curly hair. So these are all your Greek scholars who they say are so great, but they don't let you read what they say. If you just read it, they just say...
This is a blast.
They say, oh, Plato is great. And you say, oh, well, let me read. No, just say he's great. Don't read anything. Just, he's great. He was the first. Don't read.
I can't believe it. I've never heard any quote from Plato like this.
Where would you read it? You can go online and read it. You can go to a BB2 Mikasa and read it. Kala. Dada ni baoni. Nǹkan wá síbí láti bá mi sọ̀rọ̀ nípa ìtàn àwọn èèyàn dúdú. Nígbà wo mo ní nígbà wo sọ fún mi ibi tó ń ṣẹlẹ̀ Kala nígbà wo kìí ṣe níbo o ń go bínú nígbà wo ni o fẹ́ lọ nísinsìnyí fún mi ní ọgbọ̀n ìṣẹ́jú. Alright. Another one by Diodorus, he says, the whole of India is traversed by rivers. As for the people of India, those in the south are like the Ethiopians in color, although they are like the rest in respect to countenance and hair. For on account of the humidity of the air, their hair does not curl, whereas those in the north are like the Egyptians, meaning that their hair does curl like ours. And they're like the Ethiopians in color. When we're saying Ethiopians, we're not talking about the mixed ones who are the products of admixtures. It's talking about the ones in southern Ethiopia. The reason why we call it Ethiopia.
I used to think that today when I see Ethiopians, they are a little lighter.
So those are the products of invasions. But when you go to southern Ethiopia, matter of fact, the southern Ethiopians have problems with the northern, and northern have problems with southern. The southern say we are the reason why this place is called Ethiopia, because Ethiopia means burnt. Ops is literally eyes, but it's like saying enim tree, right? To say inside of the eyes is to say the face, right? But it's saying burnt of face. And they're saying you all are the reason why this place is called Ethiopia. You all just got here and mixed in with the population. The Ethiopians said the Egyptians are settlers from among themselves, as again Diodorus, and that Osiris was the leader of the settlement. The customs of the Egyptians, they say, are for the most part Ethiopian, the settlers having preserved their old traditions. For to consider the king's gods, to pay attention to funeral rites, and many other things are Ethiopian practices. Again, Ethiopia before it became the first one to be conquered by Christianity. Also, the style of their statues and the form of their writing are Ethiopian. Also, the way the priestly colleges are organized is said to be the same in both nations. For all have to do with the cult of the gods they maintain are ritually pure. I've been for Ajayi. Whatever.
Good afternoon.
I've been for Ajayi.
It's in for us. It's in for us.
If you want. To keep out. I've been for the other.
I think I'll be in dialogue with this. I prefer to be in dialogue with that man.
You need it for conducting it. You need it to conduct the choir.
I'll pay for Ajayi.
Happy birthday.
Maramini.
Or beautiful immediately.
Maramini.
That's it. So one to me and Chimney, I never buy an answer. Not saying anything.
Oh, it's just a consumption at all.
Let us come see you soon.
Unim, say, you know, monsieur, I will crew a pie cracker. Say, wouldn't know if we saw crew and one, it's just a one consumption. What I said, this is a twas one. The Emra Meconombi, it is a area and memoir, this is which I
see. Yeah, did you feel the last evening, the last one?
Sakasano. And then it meant to me, so I said, Castle Dosso, yes. Now, me name baby fever, and see when you're one, when you're a couch.
We'll be on the island.
Yeah. Our Ghana.
In our churches. Churches in quite some too.
Not of being in
Now, I'm need to see a tool from the university.
Be at them.
So, our professor will trade you today.
And one, say it. Or say about Tremoty and Rochi, more and none and handsome, and I know they're meant to me. Okay. Me toss a big rampoa and send fata. They say a pure one to me or be a bra me name there, baby. Every say, I don't cry, but I say free Congo, and I say free Tanzania, and I say free Nigeria. I don't cry, but Buami and Mammy who say, oh, Abia, and Bay Babies are not so area Senedia. At Dosso, Sanka, Japan cry.
For Cuba, Casapro, woman. They won't so. I said, Bakuno free or a Senior Break. If you see them break, it is like the language is from Senior Break.
Oh, yeah. Minim Cadabia, I Obi can cramp one, Minim say, or Wogo Bell Crama, and I say, or Kajam Wakasa. Is it a no cramp 1 million minimum one?
It wouldn't say, I teach you about the Sakasa.
I am in sir. Oh, since I know if you're mineral bone command, I'll probably answer about a mineral bone. It
one is a teacher or
media on free senior or free breakfast. Now, so free senior. Until on this, I don't know.
This is never to be good.
They still for the meal once I over to Zaga.
You got fish me pa.
Mate, you got me pa. The Koyama. Yama and Dauroma, you can it. Mess it up. You beautiful, Jay.
Oh, beautiful at the beginning.
Yeah. Into your back.
You do know.
I
say,
yeah. So this one is coming from the Romans. They say Ethiopia was the first established country on earth. The Ethiopians were the first who introduced the worship of the gods and who established laws. They say the names of nearly all the gods came to Greece. Is going back to Greece from the names of the gods. For the names of all the gods have been known in Egypt from the beginning of time. It was the Egyptians too who originated and taught the Greek ceremonial meeting, processions, and liturgies. The Egyptians were also the first to assign each month and each day to a particular deity and to foretell the date of a man's birth, his character, his fortunes, and the day of his death. This is the same thing like Okonfanochi, these type of people did. The Egyptians too have made more use of omens and prognostics than any other nation. That's coming from Herodotus. So there's so many, so I can just give them to you in a document. I'll give you a link. But yeah, there are so many, and there's actually a lecture by Theophilo Benga who I keep mentioning, where he goes through each one of these different texts, you know, making the same points. So yeah. Oh, and you did give me the
Yeah.
So these are texts. I think I'll put it in a Word document. Right now I have it in OneNote. I'll put it in a Word document. Each one has the link to the site. You can go and download the PDF of the original book.
Okay.
Okay. So what made the slave masters leave the Native Americans to come for Africans? So
there's I was having two different informations. Information from concerning this particular issue. One is that the Native Americans. Let me use. I'm talking about these Indians.
Yeah. I understand.
They were fighting those who tried to enslave them and use them for the plantations. So because they were very aggressive and they were fighting them, they had to leave them and look for somebody else. There's another school of thought that I learned in school in history, where they said that the Native Americans, when they were used for the farms and the plantations, they were dying. They kept dying. They could not withstand the pressure and some of the sicknesses that had been introduced to them by the white people. So because they kept dying, that was why they decided to look for an alternative. So I was quite a little confused as to which one to believe, whether it is because they were dying or because they were aggressive and the white man could not handle them. That's why they.
Yeah, it's a bit of both and different things in different situations. The problem that is the method that you're using to approach it, that it must be either this one or that one, whereas you had different situations in different places.
Okay.
So who was this? I want to say De las Casas was the name of the guy. This priest who was there on one of the islands, I want to say Hispaniola, and there, you had a case where first you're on an island, so there's only so many places you can run to and things like that, but they were dying, and then they said they can't, do this, so they sent to Vatican, to the Pope, to commission them to reduce to servitude, also called infidels, meaning the Africans, and they got it started from there. But then in different places, you also found where, especially like in the Americas, you're thinking about places that ended up being the United States. Yeah, people who are on their own land, so they know where the rivers are, they know where the mountains are. It would be very difficult, to attempt to keep them enslaved when it's like, I can just go home. I'm in my backyard. I'll just. So you had a combination of different things. So the problem was it this or that? It's the fact that you're trying to look at it as it's either this or that, as opposed to looking at, well, what was the situation in Hispaniola? How was that similar or different to how it was in Brazil? How is that similar to different from Mexico? You understand?
Sure.
So you had both of those, but different ones in different places. Yeah.
So information for that particular.
So look up Bartolome de las Casas. De las Casas. So this is around 1516, the year 1516. So he started to advocate for the importation of enslaved Africans to compensate for the decreasing population of the indigenous people. And I'm trying to find the name of. Yeah, you can find this brief account of the devastation of the Indies. Brief account. And this is dated 1542.
Brief account of
the devastation of the Indies. And then to the point about the indigenous people fighting, where I was raised in North Carolina, there was a story that we grew up learning about Roanoke, Roanoke colony, and they call it the Lost Colony. So they say that about, I want to say somewhere around 17 years before Plymouth Rock and Pilgrims, that these Europeans had come and tried to establish a colony on what was Roanoke Islands in Dare County of North Carolina in the United States. And there are lots of hypotheses about what happened to them. It's a lost colony. That means they got decimated, wiped out. And one of the hypotheses is that the indigenous people beat the crap out of them, got rid of them, killed them, and they didn't have any problems again. So that's coming to the other side about the people being warlike and whatever. That you had some Europeans who they never heard from again. If you can go there and find the place where the colony was supposed to have been, but you can't find any trace of those who were there. So if you look that up, Roanoke colony, also known as the Lost Colony, Roanoke. And you know, a lot of these are hypotheses because they can never know for sure what happened to them. They just know that they were no more by the time, you know, others came looking for them. Yeah, so all of those are there. Let's see what else we have. Paper. Okay, how many Africans, instead of using the term slaves, we say enslaved Africans, right? Because that lets you know these are human beings, these are African people. We say slaves. First off, slaves is coming from the word Slav, so that means white people to start off with. So when you talk about Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, all that Slav, was because they were the original slaves of the planet. You understand? So first, we're not white people. Others, we are African people who've been put in a condition like those white people, you understand, temporarily until we were able to liberate ourselves from that. But there have been several commissions on this. UNESCO and other organizations have, you know, come together with different committees and commissions to try to give an estimate, because it's impossible to ever know fully. But scholars say that you have to start your count at 200 million. So we're going beyond those who actually survived it to those who were killed. Some were marched from as far north as Burkina Faso, Mali, marched all the way to these dungeons that you find here on the coast. How many died? And when you read the accounts of the Europeans who, you know, were involved, they would talk about how, oh, this woman, when she is about to die and the baby is about to die, she'll take the baby and dash the baby's head against the thing so that they can die a quick death, as opposed to, so that one's never counted. Who was that baby? You understand? The elder. So you're getting an entire village. You say the elders and children, just kill them. The people, there was a technique where they would set the top of the house on fire. This is where we're using thatched roof. They would set the top of the house on fire. Then the ones who would come out, they would either shoot them or, you know, enslave them. How many died in the fire inside? We can never count that. So anything we're talking about has to start off with an estimate. The largest graveyard on the entire planet, do you know where it is?
The Atlantic Ocean.
Very good. You've been doing some study. So you can never count. They say that sharks used to follow behind the ships and stay in those shipping lanes because they knew that there would be blood. So imagine a wild animal saying, you know what, I don't have to hunt anymore. We know that there's going to be blood. Then you had cases where Europeans would kill the Africans to get insurance money. That we can't even count this. You know, you have insurance fraud to this day. Somebody will burn down their house and, you know, claim the money. They used to do that with African people. You understand?
How?
They would either sink the ship or kill the Africans there and say they died of disease. So you take disease insurance and then you kill them. So you would have all of us in these chains. and then you throw one overboard. This one pulls the other one. This one pulls the other, and all of them go overboard and die. And then you say, oh, there was a disease on board. I have to collect my 100,000 pounds or whatever the thing is. And there's actually a movie that documents one of these cases, and they actually do a weird spin on it where they try to say that that was the cause of the end of enslavement. But if you look at it, it's called Bell, B-E-L-L-E, and it goes through the history of this case where it was just that there was this insurance fraud or whatever. Now, what they failed to tell you in the movie is that the real thing that caused them to stop the trade portion was the Haitian Revolution had started just a year before that. You understand? So they were rather reacting to, you know what, if we continue importing these Africans, we're swelling the ranks of the enemy army. You understand? So, and Haitian Revolution wasn't the first by any chance. You had so many, the Stono Rebellion, you had, you know, all throughout the Imale revolt after.
The Haitian Revolution preceded the abolition of slavery.
Yeah, by 1 year. So before, first they abolished the quote unquote trade, saying you can't bring them from Africa anymore. That's a military strategy, because what they realized they were doing is that here's the enemy army, all these African people. You keep bringing in troops for this army. And remember, Haiti defeated the British. So first, you know, they defeated the French, and then they tried to appeal to other Europeans to come and help them. Then they defeated the British too. So before the British were saying, we have to stop this trade, that was what happened. That's what precipitated. So within 1 year of that happening is where they decided, you know what, we have to stop this. And then in the 1830s, you had the uprising in Jamaica. Within 1 week of them executing Samuel Sharp, who led that revolution, is where they stopped enslavement altogether. So you see what they do is a reaction to African people whooping that behind. I hope you understand that.
I mean, but this has, well, I don't have that information, so it could not have crossed my mind that they're trying to abolish the slave trade. I thought they were being humane, at least for once.
That's what they want you to think. That's what they want you to think. Because they plan on breathing. If you realize that you beat them before, then you would start thinking, you know what, we can beat them again. So I actually want to do a book entitled African Victories. And it should document from antiquity up to recent times African victories over non-Africans. So like if you go back to Nile Valley, you'll read about Jehuti Mess triumphing in Megiddo. So when they talk about Armageddon, that's supposed to be the end of everything. They use the term because of what Jehuti Mess did in Megiddo in southwestern Asia, where he slaughtered all of them.
I think such a book is long overdue.
Yeah, it's coming.
But no, like
so this is
for me. I thought that something like this should have been here.
It should have
years ago.
But this is the problem. How many people know how to read Middle Nature? How many black people know how to read it?
Well, so you have to read it in order to get
and then to translate it. So the book is all going to be source text, right? You could read it in translation, but this is the problem. Those who have the ability don't have the will, right? So you have all these departments of Egyptology. How come none of them are putting out a book on black people defeating white people? Because they want to keep breathing. They're not going to do that. It's like Dr. John Henry Clark used to say, powerful people are never going to educate the people who they oppress on how to gain power, right? Why would they? So those who have the ability to do it don't have the will to do it. Meanwhile, those who have the will to do it don't have the ability to do it. So it's very rare to get a combination of both will and ability.
That's the only way by which you can also bring out the truth.
That's right. That's right. So matter of fact, what we're talking about just in terms of the rebellions, I did a presentation on this. They just celebrate Emancipation Day. So I want to see if I can pull up that.
Whatever information would be good for me about that. But I mean, I've learned too much.
I'll take that to be too much in the Ghanaian sense, which is good.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
Because it's like so much, just that something small triggered my desire to write a book on the black race. And my little search, even on the internet, began to blow my mind. And I realized, wow, so all this information, even if you want to, based on what even the white people have written, you can fish out a lot of truths that are not in the public domain, or which the average black man has no clue about.
And most, even if you tell them the Europeans have done something to prevent them from even wanting to know, which is the Bible, that Egypt is bad and blah blah blah, all of that is a lie. You understand? So the so-called Hebrews were really a group of invaders called the Hyksos, right? The original name in Kemet was Hekah Hesut, which means rulers of foreign lands. So they came in, they invaded, and they oppressed the indigenous people. And you can read all this carved, you can read all these in papyrus, all of the texts, the original source texts are still there. That a ruler named Amos, who when I went to Kemet, I got a chance to see his mummy. He was able to drive them out. Now, the I, you may wonder what the I in Amos is. It's what the so-called Hebrew Jews, whatever, they still call the deity the same Yah, right? But it's coming from the original Yah, which was the deity of the moon at the time that they were driven out. So when we think about these things, it's like if we ever desire to know more, they've already planted the seed of a lie into our brains. Oh, this is bad, we can't learn about blah, blah, blah. You understand? But yeah, as soon as you just have the inclination, that's the beginning of the will. So you have to be building these two together, build the will, build the ability. Because if you have all the will in the world but you can't do anything, well, help is that if you have all the ability in the world and you refuse to do anything, what good is that going to do? So that one is coming as well. Yeah. So the presentation I did was called "The Africans Who Emancipated Themselves," to show these correlations between the Haitian Revolution and the abolishment of the so-called trade, which was bringing in soldiers. Every single shipload that came was a group of soldiers. And then the one in Jamaica, which caused them to abolish it altogether. Within 1 week of executing Samuel Sharp, the African who led that rebellion, they put together a committee on how to end it altogether. A reaction to saying, you know what, if we don't do this, the whole world is going to be Haiti, which means blacks on top, whites on the bottom, if any of them exists. If we don't stop this, then the whole world is going to be this Jamaican revolution. You understand? So it was a fear. There was no humanity, less of a... Where was your humanity before we were whooping that behind? So now, this is what... And I actually need to do an article on it because very few people know this. So even I was doing it at a restaurant, a Jamaican restaurant that was opening up, celebrating Emancipation Day. And even the Jamaicans who were there, they say, wow, we never put those two together. That they've heard of Sam Sharp, they've like sing songs about him in primary school or whatever, but they never realized that within 1 week of him being executed was when they put together that commission to end enslavement, and within 1 year it was done. I'm like, how can you not put this together? How do you know this? How do you know that this date is there? You're celebrating Emancipation Day. How do you know those two and you can't put those two together? You understand? How do you... Everyone has heard of the Haitian Revolution, where they defeated Napoleon.
Yeah.
But many people have heard Napoleon, they've never heard of Dessalines. You understand? But how can you have heard of the Haitian Revolution and you can't put two and two together that within 1 year of that is what they say we have to stop adding... We have to stop transporting soldiers to our enemy. How can you win a war when you're helping arm your enemy? You say, here's your reinforcements.
But what about the issue of the fact that Because when we read
Yeah.
about why what caused the end of the slavery or the enslavement of black people in the Western world. He talked about the industrial revolution, that because machines were now working, and it has to replace machines replaced the human hands, so it was no more necessary or smart to be bringing in more people to come and do the work that the machines are already doing.
So one thing that people don't consider is that the machines aren't causing a revolution to kill the ones who are, like the word robot, it comes from a Slavic word which means slave. Robot comes from robota, right? So when you're talking about, okay, here you have humans, here you have machines, you're basically making the machines do what the humans are doing, but the factor that isn't factored in is that the fear of what the humans have done, and you have the precedent time and time again, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rebellions, right? You can go to Guyana, you can go to, you mentioned Jamaica, you can go to Cuba, you can go to Brazil, you can go to the US, Gabriel Prosser, Nat Turner. Nat Turner's rebellion was right before the Europeans said, you know, we're going to do this. But Jamaican was even closer. So you have this deep fear of Europeans. And even if you look at some of their movies, they have a fear that the robots are going to come together. So if you look at Terminator and all these things, when you picture the robots in there, you shouldn't picture black people, because that's what they're telling you. You understand? When you see them shooting black people in the streets, that's what you should picture, is this deep fear that justice exists. You understand? If there's no justice, they're fine. But if anything like justice exists in the world, they had better be very, very afraid. And they are very, very afraid. So look at these correlations. Let's even assume that it's the Industrial Revolution that did it. Why that year? Why? It could be 20 years. Hey, robots are coming, machines are coming, we're pumping. You know, I know this whole thing. So they say, oh, they were trying to get water out of these mines and to be able to get at the coal, and they get a pump and blah. So, okay, fine. But why then? How does a pump for coal here, what does that have to do with what's going on in Jamaica? They didn't put pumps in Jamaica. The pumps weren't harvesting any crops. You understand? So there's something wrong with the logic here, and there are things missing, and the thing missing is the truth. Because truth would be like, we don't need that. We need lies, because lies are... Stop breathing right now. For the rest of this conversation, don't breathe again. You refuse? Why do you refuse?
I need to breathe to exist.
Right? And Europeans need to lie to exist, to live. Because if they don't lie, it's done. If justice exists, it's done. So anything a European says, whether it sounds good or bad, anything a European does, whether it seems good or bad, all of it comes to they want to survive and they don't want justice to be done. Any abolitionists, they want to survive, they don't want justice to be done. Any Ku Klux Klansmen, they want to survive, they don't want justice to be done. That's what they have in common. You understand? The one who is fighting for abolition, he wants to survive, right? That's the reason why he's doing it. He doesn't want justice to be done, because they didn't come to Africa and say, oh, let's only take the mean ones. You understand? So by the same token, he's like, you know what? I need to hedge my bets in case these Africans are able to get their stuff together. So then they'll be looking and saying, oh, maybe that's a good one. That's not what Dessalines said. And they fear Dessalines like nothing else. That was our great African liberator. But yeah, I'll pull this up so I can give you the actual dates. So I mentioned Slav. It comes from Latin sclavus, slave. Source also of Italian schiavo, French esclave, Spanish esclavo, originally Slav. So used in the secondary sense because because of the many Slavs sold into slavery by conquering peoples. This sense developed online etymological dictionary. This sense development arose in the consequence of the wars waged by so-called Otto the Great and his successors against the Slavs, a great number of whom they took captive and sold into slavery. What does that have to do with black people? So anytime you say this black person is a slave, you're saying this black person is a white person. You might as well be doing what the so-called Egyptologists are doing. Also from Wiktionary, from Middle English, a borrowing from Old French sclave, from medieval Latin sclavus, from late Latin sclavus as well. Because Slavs, that's Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, that's what the Slav in there means, was often forced into slavery in the Middle Ages, from Byzantine Greek, sklavos, from Old Church Slavonic, Sloveninu, possibly from Slovo, so forth and so on. So that's that, and then the date correlation so you can see why it was at that point in time. So the Slavery Abolition Act 1833 ended slavery in the British Empire August 28, 1834, with exceptions in the possession of the East India Company, island of Ceylon, island of St. Helena, and then those exceptions were eliminated in 1843. So we'll come to what was going on around this 1833, 1834. Remember that date. Then they also talk about Lord Mansfield's case, 1772, and the Somerset's case, which emancipated an enslaved person in England. So 1772, remember that date. 1833, 34, 1772. What was going on in the world that everyone knew was going on in the world? It would be like 9/11 happens and you say, oh, what's that? You come. Actually, come look. It's a slideshow, so you can actually see some of these images. So that's the Haitian Revolution. This is a European who drew this. This is what they fear. This isn't, oh, I just feel so humane now. This is what these Africans did. That's justice. That's what justice looks like if you ever wondered what justice looks like. There's Dessalines who defeated Napoleon. This is how Europeans depicted him. This is fear. Right? This isn't, I feel humane. This is fear. Look at it. This is Bookman. Right? And that's the beginning where they came together with Vodun, African indigenous spiritual systems. All these Africans from various places, just like Kemet. You have all these various types of African people coming together to fight their enemy. Exactly like the inscription of Winnie when you read that, and then picture what happened in Haiti. Because they took people from Benin Republic, they took Africans from Congo, all over. But now you have people coming together around our own African spirituality, which is why they also try to vilify it and tell you, oh, don't do it, it's evil, blah, blah. But look at what we did when we were practicing those things. We were able to come to a high level, and they weren't able to survive, and justice was being done. Right? You may wonder, well, what's in it for you? Why do you care? This is another of the Africans getting justice. Right? So you see this axe. See this? That's what they used to use for cutting cane. Now they're cutting this type of cane. Look at the knife. So these are Europeans who are drawing this. They're very aware of what happened. Look at the knife in this little Eurasian here. This is more. And then when you look at him, he's grabbing the fur of this beast here. This is the first ruler of ancient Kemet called Narmer, and he did the exact same thing in order to found Kemet. So this is when the South, the black people in the South, and they're still there, were able to defeat those who were in the North, and he used the exact same technique that you found in the Haitian Revolution. So those were some of the things that appeared in. So now, these are the Africans who were able to, and then this is another one. Révolte générale des Nègres, massacre des Blancs. And so you see this African with the sword, and see these Eurasians running away. This is fear. This is at that time, this is how they imagined, wow, if justice. If justice exists, right? So 1526, these are rebellions of enslaved Africans in North America. So Spanish Florida, we were victorious at that time. Gaspar Yanga's revolt in New Spain, that's what we now call Mexico, that was also victorious. 1712 New York slave revolt, that was repressed. The first Maroon War, British Jamaica, that was victorious. So we're winning. You understand? It's not like, oh, let's do something. Oh, no, we won. So what effect does that have when African people defeat Eurasians over and over and over and over? Eurasians will eventually sue for peace. And that's what you can call all those abolition acts that we talked about, 1834, and then before that was it 1772, right? So see what's going on in the lead up to 1772. 1733 St. John Revolt, 1739 Stoner Rebellion, 1741 New York Conspiracy.
And these incidents, the white people don't argue that they didn't have.
This is European sources.
They are right.
They're the ones who build their careers in academia based on this information. So if you want to even read about it, you have to go to Europeans to read about these rebellions.
So this is not we trying to make something up.
So do your research. Think it is. Pretend like it is, and then go do your research and find out. I would prefer for you to think it's just something that we're trying to make up, because that will make it even more jolting when you start reading about it. But to learn about any of these, you have to read. For the most part, there are Africans who worked on this. But think about Herbert Aptheker. That was a European who worked on this information, right? To even get at it, you have to go to them, because they were the ones who had access to the archives and all those things. Mina Conspiracy. Mina is talking about Africans from Ghana. 1791, 1795 is Point Coupé. 1791 Haitian Revolution, but the first one. So this is when it started to come into full effect, but the very first act was that one that you saw in the picture with them around the bonfire. That comes before. We'll come back to that point to make those correlation. 1800 Gabriel Prosser in Virginia. 1803 Igbo Landing. 1805 Chatham Manor. 1811 German Coast Uprising. 1815 George Buxley. 1860 Bussers Rebellion. 1822 Demar Vesey. 1831, we're coming to the second date, Nat Turner's Rebellion. 1831 through 32, the Baptist War in British Jamaica. That's the one that we're going to come to for the final abolition. This was what turned the tide. 1839, Amistad Ship Rebellion off the Cuban coast, victorious. 1841, the Creole Cay Ship Rebellion, victorious. 1842, revolt against the Cherokee Nation. Those are the indigenous people who were enslaving black people. Maybe people don't know that the indigenous people there enslaved black people, and we had to fight, and some were able to escape into what's now known as Mexico to get away from them. 1859, the raid at Harper's Ferry. So this is more information about each one. In Berbice and Guyana, you had that one against the Dutch colony. The Bayano Wars in Panama. So this is every single place we went to, we whooped that behind. You understand? Black people are sitting there like, even the black people who you know now, if you try to get them to work at a job, they will have a problem. Much less you do this. Curaçao, revolt of 1795, the Creole case, 1841, in Nassau, Bahamas. Demerara, that was in Guyana, was now Guyana. So all these rebellions in the West Indies. So it said the first time the British Army faced a slave revolt beyond its control was actually not on British territory. In 1793, when Britain was at war with France, it invaded the French territory of Saint-Domingue. The British Army wanted to seize this lucrative colony for itself and suppress a vast slave uprising, they use that term, taking place in Saint Domingue before it could spread to the nearby British colony of Jamaica. So it says shook the West Indies. The army failed. That means the British got defeated. 5 years and more than 12,000 British deaths later, the Redcoats withdrew. These Africans whooped that behind. I hope you understand that terminology. Yeah. An army of rebel enslaved Africans had defeated the army of the world's superpower and the largest slave trading nation. So what did that do to their psyche? That they're supposed to, and you had Napoleon, who was supposed to have the greatest military in the world. He ran roughshod over all of Europe, and he got defeated by Haiti. That's why Europeans keep Haiti the way it is now. Yes, hello. Good afternoon. Oh, yes. It went very well. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. He says 6:30. 5:30. Okay, 5:30. It should be okay. We're about to go to town to the National Theater. They're selling books. And I'm taking my children there. But I'll see if I can get back. If not, you can give me a call and we can do it. I think we can do it via call, right? Yeah, if possible, I will try to get back for that. Yeah? Okay, no problem. So 5:30 at Radio Universe. Okay, no problem. Thank you. Yeah, so the humiliation and defeat, the humiliation of this defeat sent a shockwave through the British establishment and indirectly strengthened the forces in Parliament that voted to abolish the slave trade in 1807. You understand? So this information is very clear. So all these scholars build their entire careers on this information, but we black people, we don't know anything about it. Right? So even if you go online and just do a search, these are quotes from articles. Right? New uprisings shook the British Caribbean in later years. The greatest of them erupted in Jamaica at the end of 1831. More than 20,000 captives seized control of much of the northwest corner of the island, setting planters' houses on fire. Many of these were on ridges or hilltops, and as they burst into flames, they acted like beacons to spread the revolt. It took the British Army and militia a month to get the country under control. Some 200 enslaved Africans and 14 white people had died in the fighting. At least 340 more slave rebels were hanged or shot afterwards. In Britain, and this is from the BBC. The article is from the BBC, not from me.
Not from GTV.
No, not GTV. In Britain, news of the revolt almost certainly hastened the coming of emancipation. So first Haiti shook them, and then this one shook them to their core. Right. So it said both private correspondence and testimony before Parliament showed that colonial officials and high-ranking military men expected more revolts and feared that the British military might not be able to contain them. It was no coincidence that a new Parliament voted to free the slaves in the following year. This is BBC. So if you want any information on Britain, there you have it.
BBC is giving
bbc.co.uk/history/British/abolition/William_article_01.shtml. And then the grudge against Haiti. So President Thomas Jefferson, who was a rabid, fanatic racist, the United States cut off aid to Louverture and instead pursued a policy to isolate Haiti, fearing, so fear is the main factor, not humanitarian anything, fearing that the Haitian Revolution would spread to the United States. So this Thomas Jefferson, who was supposed to be about liberty and democracy, he was enslaving African people. So his thing was fear because he pictured all those Africans around his bed at night with machetes. You understand? So all of their policy and their moves are reactions to what African people are doing. And the lesson is clear. If you want something to change, how did you get change before? Once you know these facts, you know how you got change before. It's not by sitting down praying and hoping that whites are going to stop being whites, or hoping that they are going to decide to stop breathing anytime soon. This is how you got change then. Within 1 year of this, change. Within 1 week of this, change. We're coming back. And then Haiti as enduring inspiration. The Malay Revolt, also known as the Great Revolt, was perhaps the most significant rebellion in Brazil. On a Sunday during Ramadan in January 1835, in the city of Salvador da Bahia, a small group of black enslaved Africans, as I prefer, and freedmen inspired by Muslim teachers rose up against the government. Muslims were called Malay in Bahia at this time, from Yoruba to Malay, that designated a Yoruba Muslim. The enslaved Africans knew about the Haitian Revolution and wore necklaces bearing the image of President Dessalines, who had declared Haitian independence. I hope my audio is still good. Yeah. So that's what was going on there. And then Jamaica, the rebellion, which was the main one. So there had been a number of rebellions by enslaved Africans on the island of Jamaica. 16 slave rebellions had taken place between 1655 and 1813. There were also major uprisings in 1816 and 1823. By the 1820s, more than 2,500 enslaved people were escaping from the plantations each 1 year, and swelling the ranks of those Africans who were in the mountains. 1831 saw this is 1831, remember that date, saw the largest slave uprising. It started with the enslaved people refusing to work. The strike was meant to be peaceful, with the aim of forcing the owners to pay the enslaved people to cut the cane so it would not spoil. Things soon escalated. Enslaved Africans burned down houses and warehouses full of sugar cane, causing over £1 million worth of damage. That's $1 million in that time. That's much more now. More than 200 plantations in the north of Jamaica were attacked as 20,000 enslaved people seized control of large chunks of land. That is the fear of Europeans more than anything else. 20,000 Africans coming for your head. That will get your humanitarian sensibilities working. If they weren't working before, that'll get them charged up. The rebels were led by Samuel Sharp. The main rebellion lasted 10 days, but it took British troops the whole of January 1832 to restore order. It resulted in the death of nearly 200 Africans and 14 British planters or overseers. However, the repercussions of the rebellion were more terrible. Hundreds of the rebels were captured and over 750 were convicted, of which 138 were sentenced to death. Some were hanged, others were shot by firing squad. Most of those who escaped the death sentence were brutally punished, sometimes so harshly that they died anyway. Sharp was executed in public. The revolt was very important and helped to end British slavery. It also shocked the British government and made them see that the costs and dangers of keeping slavery in the West Indies were too high. It reminded many of the Saint-Domingue, that's Haiti, rebellion. There were fears of another major rebellion on Jamaica, and many terrified, remember fear, not humanitarian concerns. There were fears of another major rebellion on Jamaica, and many terrified plantation owners were now ready to accept abolition, because we're the ones who caused them to be ready, rather than risk a widespread war. Just 1 week after Sharp's death, Parliament appointed a committee to consider ways of ending slavery. Within 1 week, you better get your committee together. You understand? So you have to understand how things relate together. If they just tell you, this is the date of abolition, this is the date of this rebellion, you just walk away, okay. You can't see any connection. But what if I tell you this came about as a result of this? That's where you're actually learning history. They don't want you to learn history, they want you to memorize dates, because then it's all meaningless. But when you see how something relates to you, is relevant to you, and is relative to you, that's where you actually have history going on. Some people prefer our story. And then the one they call the greatest one in modern history, some people say it's Haiti, others say it's the Civil War. So by the time the war ended in 1865, it's talking about the United States, about 180,000 black men had served as soldiers in the U.S. Army. So that's more than the 20,000 you have in Jamaica, almost 200,000 here. This was about 10% of the total Union fighting force. Most, about 90,000, were former contraband slaves from the Confederate States. About half of the rest were from loyal border states, and the rest were free blacks from the north. 40,000 black soldiers died in the war, 10,000 in battle, 30,000 from illness or infection. So the conclusion were Africans emancipated ourselves from chattel enslavement. Haiti was the ever-looming and imminent threat of the U.S. becoming another Haiti, of the UK becoming another Haiti, of the entire world becoming another Haiti. So they forced Haiti to pay reparations. In modern terms is something like billions and billions and billions in reparations to France. All that was to get Haiti to where it is now, because their thing is, if Haiti becomes the example of success, you understand, then they're no longer breathing, they won't survive, and justice will be done. So all the things that they've done, even from Aristide, getting him out of there, to the Duvaliers who they supported, making sure that they are terrorizing the population, all of those things are Europeans doing the same thing they've always done. So we started off in Kemet. They were doing that in Kemet. They want to survive. They don't want justice. Back then, 5,000 years ago, a few hundred years ago, they want to survive. They don't want justice to be done. So now you're thinking that they're going to change and have a change of heart. Oh. And I think we can see a pattern from them being in the caves of Europe. Might makes right, only the strong survive. I'll take a club and club you, and then steal your wife and eat your baby. You understand? You can see a pattern from there all the way up to the state that Haiti is in right now.
How can I get information on some of the barbaric acts?
So look at Cheikh Anta Diop's book, Civilization or Barbarism. So you can find that online if you go to a site called Library Genesis.
Sure.
And another fact that I gave the people there was that in the United States, do you know that slavery is still legal? It's never been abolished in the United States.
Really?
Yeah. So let me read the 13th Amendment. They say, listen very closely to the wording, because the wording is what tells you. They say neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except, there's a caveat, let me start again, because I saw you ready. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime, whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. This means slavery can exist as long as I say you committed a crime. You don't even have to have committed a crime as a white person. All I have to do is say that you did. So where's your working papers? Show me that you have a job. If not, okay, you're a truant. You understand? Now I get you to work for free on a railroad. Now I get you to drain the swamp. Now I get you to dig 5 tons of coal in one single day. And there was a quote, I actually wrote an article on this. There's a quote where they said, oh, this new slavery is better than the old one, because with the old one you had to keep feeding them and clothing them even in the winter when they're not harvesting. With this one, you can work them to death and then just go arrest another one. You understand? So they still have the same thing they call the prison industrial complex, where they target black people. Ones that they don't shoot, they put into prison, then they end up working for free again. So a lot of the products that you see from Sony, a lot of these corporations own or have major stakes in these privatized prisons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A lot of even the music companies that have a lot to do with gangster rap and these other things, saying, yeah, you should be a criminal and sell drugs. So the people who are in prison are making those CDs and other things, you understand? And then they send it out to get that into your mind that, oh, you should be a criminal. And then even if you say, I won't fall for it, I'm going to be an upstanding member of society. All that has to happen is a white police officer says you committed a crime. So this guy, Henry Louis Gates, is one of the people who says there's no such thing as race. Racism doesn't exist. And then the police came into his house and arrested him in his own house. This Harvard professor who says race doesn't exist. So on that day, he came to understand that, oh yes, it still does. And if,
On that day,
ironically enough, but imagine what happens to those who aren't Harvard professors, who can't call up the president of Harvard and say, oh, they made a mistake or whatever. You understand? What happens to just the regular guy? Well, he ends up enslaved. Per the wording of the 13th Amendment, which says it won't exist unless we say you committed a crime, and your crime is being black. Or rather, their own crime is them being white. No one told you go up to the caves for those thousands of years. You could have stayed in the sun.
wow.
So lots of
Please, concern the barbarism.
Civilization or Barbarism. That's a book by Sir Anta Diop. Let me write it for you.
My pen
It's not working. You'll see it with the U.S. spelling. It's all good with that. So look for that one by him. Also look for Bucheku, 500 years of European behavior. Oh, you know what? Probably the best one. I have an E version of it, Yurugu. Y-U-R-U-G-U, Yurugu. An African-centered critique of European behavior. That's by Moremo Ani, Dr. Moremo Ani. So, Civilization of Barbarism. Also look up, what is this one? African Origin of Civilization. That's also by Sir Hunter Diop. And then Cultural Unity of Black Africa. Alright, so actually the first one and this one are probably going to be the best one. Cultural. Look up those. There are so many.
Yeah.
There are some even Europeans have written the Iceman Inheritance and others. So they're trying to understand why they behave as they behave. Let me see. So were Egyptians dark-skinned in ancient times? I think we've already covered that.
Yeah.
And when you look at the video, it's a lecture that I gave for Kemet Matters. I show the actual carving. So even, this is the thing, don't listen to the Europeans, don't even listen to me, just go and look at them. You understand? So in that I show the original carvings and paintings of Amenhotep III Narmer, the very first ruler, right? If anybody is going to show you what the country is about, it should be the very first ruler. So Narmer, he looks like Mike Tyson. When you see him, you'll think he looks just like Mike Tyson. Amenhotep III, Amenhotep IV, Ramesses. You can't find any ruler all the way till you get to Greek and Roman times where we were defeated, or the Hyksos who came in as invaders, who's not black. All of the rulers. But what Europeans do, I often think about the analogy. Imagine, let's say, 3,000 years into the future. You know, in Ghana there are Lebanese people, right? Now none of them have been president yet, but there are Lebanese people. But imagine 3,000 years into the future, they dig up the grave of a Lebanese and say, look, these are what Ghanaians were like. You understand? Or they'll find a billboard about skin lightening cream. And they'll show you, look, this is what Ghanaians look like. They weren't black people. You understand? Imagine doing that. We don't have to imagine because that's what Europeans do. They'll find like none of the rulers, none of the royalty, none of anybody. They'll find the most random and say, look, there was one here. and that's exactly what we're dealing with. So by the same token, this is why, you know, it really hurts my heart amongst other reasons when I see women who try to make their African hair look like a horse or a dog or a pig. You understand? Or this thing. You understand?
I get you.
Because in the future, people say there were no black people here. Any accomplishments that Ghana does, in the future they'll say, no, these weren't done by black people. Look at them. They'll go to Osu and see, look, this is the guy who owns Frankie's. And we'll say, no, but look, Mahama, Atta Mills. Even the lightest president, if you want to go light, you can say, okay, you go to Rollins. But even he's still black. Look at his hair. Look at. You understand? But if anything, they'll just say, look, Rollins was the only president. The rest of them, don't look at them. No, let's shh, don't. And then they'll have testimony from the United States, from the UK, from everyone else saying these were black people. But they won't let you read it. They say, no, don't.
Sometimes even some of their own people come out with findings that prove that point. But it's like it seems to be covered sometimes
because they want to read. You understand? Even though, you know, in the US they had this thing, Eric Garner saying, I can't breathe. The police were on his back, they killed him. Put their knee in his back, he had asthma. He said, I can't breathe, they killed him. So even though they don't want us to breathe, they want to continue breathing. And that's what happens, their knee is on our back, literally there, but metaphorically here. And we're saying we can't breathe. But they realize if we're on top, then they won't breathe. Bram? Yeah. Who does what you maybe all. Yeah, so that's where we are. So I hope you've done something for me.
a lot, so much. I mean, something that if I want to take my time to go into, to take me years. But I'll read and pick up.
And it's better for you to approach it. I see a quote here from Thomas Jefferson. If God is just, I tremble for my country. This quote just came up on your PC. If God is just, I tremble for my country. That's Thomas Jefferson. You know, in light of everything we've said, from their own mouth, it summarizes all of this thing perfectly. If justice exists.
Seriously, because I have talked about it. That if truly there will be justice and justice exists, then these people who have enslaved black people, done such serious evil to them, will pay for it one day. I think about this sometimes. Because you don't commit such atrocities against humans and go free. I believe.
Yeah, the very first understanding of law in the world was called Ma'at. You can actually see a poster showing all of the 42 declarations of innocence. That's where they got the 10 Commandments from. They plagiarized it right from here. But in it, Ma'at had the concepts of truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, balance, order, and then propriety. So all of those wrapped up into one thing. So that's an African concept. And it was represented by a woman with an ostrich feather in her hair. And the idea was your heart would be weighed against this ostrich feather. That's where they got the idea of judgment. They say when a person dies, your heart is weighed against the ostrich feather. and if your heart is lighter than the feather, it means that you are innocent. And you say all these 42 things. I have not killed, I have not stolen, I have not so. That's where they got the so-called 10 commandments from. But Europeans narrowed it down to 10 because they said we can't do all 42. That's too difficult. They weren't more. Someone just came out of a cave a few hundred years ago. How do you expect them to live up to this thing? They said, "We'll do the 10. You just leave it there."
I've got so much. So finally concerning the way forward for black people. If I could get, because I intend to talk about how we can come out of our problems and our troubles, become successful as a people. So I don't know if you have some thoughts.
I'd like to hear your thoughts first. With what has just been shared, let me get your thoughts about the movement.
From what we have shared so far, I realize we are in absolute darkness as a people. For majority of black people, we are ignorant.
Yeah.
About a lot of things.
Well, let me check my audio here. It seems like it's a bit low. I'll pause it and how when it came out. No? Okay. Yeah. So your thoughts about?
Yeah. So from the key thing I can talk about now concerning the black race for now. Is that it's like we are in the dark. We are in the dark concerning certain truths about the past and about our ancestors. That if we should know and if we should learn from, can help us to change our situation and get us ahead in life. So if in my estimation, if we are able to go back into the past and go back into history and get to know the truth, it will help us to change our lives and our situation and circumstances. Because I believe knowledge is power. Once you get the knowledge, you are empowered to change your circumstances and situations. So that's what I think.
I think it's good. My father says history tells us not to be a fool twice. How not to be a fool twice. By the same token, you can see it like it also teaches us that something that we think is a good idea may actually be a bad idea. You understand? So hypothetically, we would say, oh, you know what? We should continue allowing Eurasians to come into Ghana or Africa, right? But with the history,
the word
it means Europe and Asia is one thing. Eurasia, EURASIA, Eurasia. So it's like saying, okay, we should just keep allowing them to come into Africa. But what history does, and it seems like, okay, well, what's the problem, right? But history tells us to bring this from something hypothetical to what happened the last time we did that. And then what happened the time before that. Then what happened the time before that. Then what happened the time before that. You keep asking that question over the past 100 times, the last 1,000 times, the last 2,000 times. You realize the answer is the same for every single time. Now, if your history only goes back the last 20 minutes, you're basically suffering from amnesia. So if I ask you, well, what happened last time, you say, I don't know. Let's try it. It would be like if I took a hammer and I hit you on the forehead, and it jolts your memory to the point you don't remember being hit with the forehead. I said, oh, you don't remember being hit in the forehead. I said, oh, do you think we should do that again? He said, oh, sure, let's do it. Bam. I said, do you think we should do that again? He said, yeah, I think so. Let's try it. We've never tried it before. Let's try it. Bam. Do you think we should do that again? Oh, since it's the first time, we might as well try it for the first time. We don't know what. Bam. What will happen to you eventually? Right? That is what happens with African people with us not knowing our history, or at best we just know some disconnected dates. And those disconnected dates we're limited to are within the last maybe 400 years, 500 years tops. Right? That is a person without any memory. And as silly as those analogies sound, that's exactly how silly we are. Because we're asking, well, what happened last time? We don't know. We think this is the first time. Let's have Arabs who have conquered the northern part of Africa, let's put them into the African Union. And then when Haiti applies to join the African Union, say, no, you're not African enough. So you let your enemy who you were fighting against for all of those thousands of years, you say, you are part of our group. And then you let someone who's more African in the sense of what African means, it means all the parts. Not some white people in Berlin saying, you stay here, and that's going to be called Gold Coast. You stay here, that's going to be called Dahomey. You stay here. You understand? That's not African at all. That is fragment, 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 fragment. African means all of these. It means Kemet. All the black people. Right? Haitians and Haiti is Africa. All the black people. They didn't say we're only going to take those who are coming from Dahomey. We're only going to take those coming from the slave coast, so-called. We're only... that's everybody. And what happened when everybody came together? They defeated Britain, what was supposed to be the greatest military power. They defeated France. And not just once, on multiple occasions, what was supposed to be the best military. So France is going forward. Every single country is falling to Napoleon. You understand? All of them. But now he comes to all African people united. He gets his butt handed to him on a platter. So this is telling you this is what happens when we actually have African, when it means African, all the black people. So now they come to join the African Union. No, you can't come in. That is, the people who say that, that's the most anti-African thing that they've ever done. And the people who say that, I would never call them Africans, I would call them anti-Africans. You can't tell me you're African just because you happen to have been born here, no? If every single thing you do is anti-African, I should call you an anti-African. What do you do in the area of economics? If you go and buy Mercedes-Benz and you don't buy Kandanka, that's anti-African behavior, but let's not stay there. What do you wear? If all you wear is suits and ties and tuxedos and never anything made by African people, that's anti-African. But let's not just stay there. Alright, what language do you speak? If all you speak is British, English, and you speak French better than the French people, that's anti-African. So we can go to every single area. In the area of health, do you deal with indigenous African herbs and medicines, or do you inject this and take this and whatever? That's anti-African. So if I do an aggregate score, I think they do this for Olympics, aggregate scores. So now if I come to all of these things and every single thing you do in every single area is anti-African, why would I call you an African? The best term would be you are an anti-African. Now that doesn't mean you have to stay that way permanently, but I can only judge based on what your behaviors are. But now I come over here, I see this person is African in terms of the language they speak, the clothes they wear, the companies they support, the things they do, the things they eat, every single area they're African. Then I would say this is an African, this is an anti-African, regardless of location or where you happen to be. It's even better when you can combine those two, location and sense.
So you have to come together as Africans and behave African.
That's an option. But the challenge is you have more anti-Africans than you have Africans, so even to come together, you're coming together with an anti-African, right? You ask the anti-African, have they heard of Imhotep? They say no. You ask them, have you heard of Julius Caesar? They say yes. How are you going to come together with someone who is anti-African in everything they do, right? So it's a challenge, right? But the best thing to do, at least in terms of seed time, we're just planting seeds to get started, would be to come together with other Africans. When I say African, I don't mean you happen to have been born somewhere and this is your passport. No, I mean in every area of human activity, you're African. So you come together with that person and you cultivate your own children, you cultivate those of others, and you swell your ranks. Because when you have more Africans and anti-Africans is when you can really get some wiggle room to do what you need to do, right? Otherwise you have anti-Africans who are, I met someone who was very much like that. So his wife is white, okay? He doesn't speak his own mother tongue, okay? He tries to speak more British than the Queen, okay? So if you just go down the list of all these different things, it's so sad you almost want to laugh, or so funny you almost want to cry. I don't know which one. But here's someone who, if you look at him, you'll say, oh, you're African. But in every single area. But why? Because Europeans have told him that he's never done anything before. So now if you want to be good, now you have to aspire to be a European. But imagine what if he had, and he's built his whole castle in the sand on the fact the Africans have never done anything. So now what if you tell him, oh, African people did do something. So here is an anti-African. He would have to deconstruct all those things and start building again. He really doesn't have that kind of time. He's older, so he doesn't have that kind of time. And it would require such a shift. Everything he put his brain into. So he knows all this random stuff about Poland. You know, he does poetry, so he writes poetry about all these random places. And he knows about, oh, this is a bridge where so-and-so was killed. You know, this is where so-and-so picked a rose and sang, you know, whatever. So he knows all this random European trivia, and he has never read any literature in his own mother tongue. But his mother tongue isn't African. It's an African language, but that alone isn't African. That's a pre-colonial fragment. For him to really start being African means that he knows his mother tongue and one from Senegal. That's when you start talking about moving towards being African. That means he knows the one from his mother tongue, the one from Senegal, and then maybe the one from South Africa. That's where he's really starting. He's not done. That's where he's only just starting to become African. And then beyond just a language, he knows the same way he knows the trivia about this is where the Magna Carta or whatever, and he's going to write a poem. He would have to also know about this is whoever, Sunjata Keita. You understand? This is Amenhotep. This is Amenirinas. This is Amane Shikento, right? This is Nzinga. And the way I've traveled to all these random places in Europe, I've gone to all these places in Africa, and I have first-hand experience. I do African combat sciences. You understand? I can read and write an African language, not only the modern day ones, but the ancient ones that were the first ones to ever be reduced to writing. That's where you're just starting to be African, right? And once you understand that, you will be linking with the Africans in Haiti. You'll be linking with the Africans in Brazil. You'll be linking with the Africans in the Pacific Islands, the Africans in Australia, the ones who are left in Haiti, Hawaii, all over. That's where you start being African. But beyond even doing that, I think about how all Europeans want to survive and don't want justice to be done. So they do things collectively, but even on an individual level. So if you go to any random European and say the Africans in Kemet were black, first they don't want Kemet. That's why they say ancient Egypt. They don't even want the word Kemet. They say, oh, it just means the black soil. If they really believed that, then they would have no problem saying Kemet, 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 Kemet. But they know as soon as they say Kemet, you ask, what's that Kemet? And their whole thing will just come down like a house of cards. So they prefer not even to use the word, so you'll never even know the word exists, right? But I'm using that as an example of how anything that they do, even on an individual level, it's like a knee-jerk reaction. No, they're not. You understand? I can pull 100 white people from wherever and ask them whether people in Kemet, black people, all of them know that if they say that they are, they're not breathing anymore. If black people are good, that means that they must be bad. This is European thinking. For me to be this high, you have to be this low. And the more I say you've never done anything, makes me feel like, oh, that means I civilized you. That means I came in. So the further down you go, the higher up they go for their psychology, right? So to some degree, their mentality is on an individual level. It's systematic, but the system is upheld by all these individuals who know inside of them. Nobody had to tell them that, but they just know automatically Kemet must be, or Egypt must be white, right? So the point I'm making is, if we can get to a point where African people is so embedded in us that even you can just ask people randomly, they know the thing that benefits black people, that helps us to breathe. You understand? It's based on truth. So their whole thing is based on lies. We have our whole thing based on truth. And then if I tell you, oh, they were just dark-skinned Caucasians, you'll know automatically to just slap my face. It's built into you that I reject lies. I'm an anti-lie machine. I can't even tolerate it. So if you can get all of those types of Africans coming together, that's where you start having some movement, in my opinion. Somebody just sent this thing through.
Chasing the lion.
If united, the result is this: is all these buffalo chasing the lion away. Now, one single buffalo trying to chase a lion, it may have different results. It may be the same, but it may be different. So I think we can do it.
You see, I still have my.
I wish you had more quotes from Africans. If you just look up one single text from ancient Kemet, you'll have more wisdom literature than all of those put together, and a lot wiser. The instructions of Ptahhotep, instructions of Ani, Nsinga, so-called papyrus, so forth and so on, and there are so many. We never get a chance to read them.
It looks like I couldn't record.
I didn't go through. I think this one, I'll test it out. So let's close out. I think, I'll try to put it in here and see if it comes out. That's why it's always good to have a backup plan to your backup plan.